Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as Hades, the God of the Underworld, Part 4. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Blood stained the soil. Smoke billowed into the skies. All across the overworld, humanity groaned beneath the weight of punishment or trial. No one truly knew. Ever since Prometheus gifted them fire, the monsters came in waves, beasts that defied nature, creatures with eyes that glowed in the dark and bodies like twisted shadows of man and beast. Villages burned. Children cried. Elders wept. And still, the gods did nothing. But mortals, stubborn as ever, endured. Among them was Helios. His tribe was small but stubborn, surviving through sheer grit and clever traps. They live near a region that has now become a den of mongooses. Helios, tall and sharp-eyed, led them through forests of ash and plains riddled with scorched bones to reach the agreed meeting place, an ancient ruin with a single circular stone table cracked in the middle, left behind by a people long gone. Around it now sat 11 men and women, each bearing the scars of battle. Each one a leader of a tribe. Bronze weapons leaned beside them, swords, spears, and axes. Faces were grim, jaws clenched. The meeting began with silence. Then, a weathered old man slammed the butt of his spear on the stone. "We are cursed," he declared. "This is the wrath of the gods for accepting the flame. Prometheus has damned us." Another scoffed, a younger woman with a hawk-feathered cloak. "Or this is a test. The gods gave us a gift, now they wish to see if we are strong enough to hold it. They could test us without slaughtering our children," another snapped, eyes red from sleepless nights and fresh grief. Helios stood slowly, arms crossed. "It doesn't matter whether it is punishment or trial. The monsters are real. They are killing us. If we argue while our people die, then we've already failed the gods or waited for the monsters." Silence returned. The wind howled through the broken stones of the ruin. "I suggest we pray and ask the gods for help." "Ha! As if those guys would even offer us any help. I suggest we attack the monsters first and annihilate them before they annihilate us." "No, that would get us killed faster." One by one, they shared their ideas, building stronger walls, migrating south, praying to the gods, sacrificing captured beasts. None could agree. Each leader thought only of their own tribe. Finally, Helios stepped forward and laid his hand on the cracked stone table. "We must become one." The leaders looked at him. "One tribe. One voice. One shield. We will not survive as 11 weak branches. But we can become a tree." "Who would lead this tree of yours?" one chieftain asked coldly. "You." Helios shrugged. "Unfortunately, I don't have any interest in leading. We can choose, or fight, or vote. I don't care how. But if we remain divided, we die." They erupted. "I have the largest tribe. My warriors are stronger than yours. I was chosen by my god." "No, I was. My tribe is the best hunters. We can provide more food." At this moment, the table shook as tempers rose. Weapons clanged. Shouts echoed in the ruin. Then came the scream. A young scout, barely more than a boy, came running, stumbling on cracked stone, blood on his arms. "Monsters. They're coming, hundreds of them. Claws, horns, they're surrounding the camp." The leaders froze. Helios grabbed his spear. "I don't care about being leader or not," he said, voice hard like hammered bronze. "But I will fight. I will protect as many people as I can. If you follow, then fight beside me. If not, may the gods favor your tribes." He turned and marched out of the ruin, his tribe already rallying behind him. And slowly, ashamed, angry, desperate, one by one, the other leaders followed. For the first time in history, the tribes would stand together. But unity born in fire was unity tested in blood. The age of tribes was ending. And a new age for humanity had just begun. For beneath the realm of mortals, along the rivers of Styx and Lethe, within the black-stoned halls of Hades' fortress, the god of the dead observed. A faint, silver-blue projection hovered in the air before Hades, displaying the overworld, its burning forests, crumbling villages, and, in the center of it all, a band of humans finally uniting. The figure at their front, Helios, stood tall with a cracked bronze sword and a fire in his eyes that even gods could feel. Hades, seated in his obsidian throne, rested his chin upon one hand. A small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. "They finally do it," he murmured. Unity in the face of extinction. Although a bit cruel, with this, humanity has taken a step to becoming the lord of this land. Just then, his chamber doors flew open, slamming against the black marble walls with a thunderous clang. "Aphrodite," he muttered without turning, recognizing the divine signature immediately. She stormed in like a frustrated gust of spring wind, though in truth, she looked more like she'd barely survived a hurricane. Her golden hair was tangled at the ends, her dress slightly wrinkled, and most tellingly of all, there were dark circles beneath her eyes. The goddess of beauty, clearly, had not been sleeping. Yet as soon as Hades turned to face her, all imperfections vanished. As if the underworld itself refused to let her appear anything less than perfect before its king. Hades, of course, noticed, but said nothing. "Adjusting well to the underworld?" he asked dryly. Aphrodite let out a soft groan. "It's dark, it's cold, and the spirits keep asking me if I'm some kind of hallucination." She dropped herself onto the edge of his desk before rising again, pacing behind him instead. "And yet here you still are." "I never said I hated it. Besides, I do all this because Hera and Lady Hecate all told me that you like hardworking women," she replied smoothly, placing her arms gently around his shoulders, her cheek resting next to his. "I just didn't expect to do so many things. Work. Meetings. More work. More meetings. And even more work. Underworld is incredibly understaffed." She leaned closer, her chest pressing against his back, her golden curls brushing against his jaw as she gazed at the floating image of Helios and the human tribes. "They're not bad," she admitted. "I wasn't expecting these glorified monkeys to actually amount to something. But look at them. Tools, courage, intelligence, and wisdom, they have developed quite well in my opinion." Hades chuckled, low and amused. "That's rare. You're not one to praise others." She smirked. "Well, perhaps it's because I've grown fond of them. For centuries, they've done little more than rut and fight over shiny stones. They are ugly and weak. Dumb and reckless. Their lifespan is short and fleeting. They have shown no potential for greater things. Until now. They were never meant to advance and grow this quickly," Hades replied, voice calm and ancient. "But perhaps due to their own mortality, they learned to make the most use of their short lives. The gods are stars, burning bright and never changing. But humans, they burn, and then they change. Then they burn again. That's what makes them so fascinating." Aphrodite hummed thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But enough of those guys." She stood up straight and went in front of him, hands slamming on his desk. "The smell of mint is becoming too thick. It's making me dizzy. Please tell Minth and Lady Demeter to lay off the planting." "You'll get used to it," Hades murmured. "And if not, you'll suffer through it like the rest of us." He tried asking them before, but their arguments after that were something he wished to forget. For the kind and gentle women that they are, they really turned incredibly aggressive when it comes to plants. Not even Hades can withstand them. She stared at him straight before a helpless sigh escaped her lips. "I wish I could hit you for making a lady endure all these. But I can't because I love you. You're lucky, you know that, right? You've got the most beautiful goddess in the cosmos dancing on your palm." "Yes, I heard that a lot." For a while, they stood in silence, before Aphrodite draped over him once again, watching mortals fight for survival. "Well, enough of that. Let me see those humans." "You really grew fond of them," said Hades. Aphrodite smiled at him. "Well, they are a race that is favored by the man I loved, so it's natural, right?" Hades remained silent, not knowing how to respond to her feelings. So he can only sigh and watch the projection with her. A goddess born from the sea and a god forged in the depths of the earth, looking down on a race not made by either of them, yet stirring something in both. And far above, Helios stood tall, bronze sword raised, shouting orders as a pack of monsters descended upon them. The first battle of humanity's new future was beginning. and in the depths of death, two gods watched it bloom. Smoke curled through the skies like dying prayers, the scent of blood and burning flesh thick in the air. The sun, if it could still be called that, was veiled behind a blanket of ash and winged beasts. Below it, at the foot of a valley once used by farmers, battle raged. Helios stood at the forefront, his muscles tense and slick with sweat, his cracked bronze sword held high. Charge! His voice roared like thunder, and his tribe surged forward at his command, men and women wielding crude spears, jagged swords, and wooden shields bound with sinew. The other tribe leaders also led their tribe to attack. Their war cries filled the air as they clashed with the beasts. The monsters, creatures twisted by chaos, with tusks of iron and limbs like scythes, met the charge head-on. Some crawled on all fours with shrieking mouths in their chests, while others stood tall like giants, swiping aside humans like flies. The sound of bones snapping echoed. Screams rose. Blood sprayed the dirt, turning the once fertile ground into a crimson swamp. Helios led from the front, darting between a towering beast's legs, slicing at tendons and plunging his sword into its chest. It howled in rage before collapsing. He didn't pause. Another lunged, and he ducked under a claw, jabbing upward to pierce its neck. But despite his lead, the battlefield was descending into chaos. "Stay in formation," he shouted, but his voice was drowned beneath the cacophony of terror and steel. Humans were falling, slain by sharp fangs and heavier bodies. The tribes had never fought together. Every group protected their own, and none trusted the other. The once assembled coalition fractured into clumps of panicking warriors. Orders were ignored. Cries for help went unanswered. "Protect the flank," one tribe leader shouted. "Fall back. We're overwhelmed," cried another. "No. Press forward. We have the numbers." Confusion reigned. Helios gritted his teeth, watching a line collapse under the weight of a charging beast. It trampled a boy no older than 15. His scream was short-lived. He had to act. Enough. Helios bellowed, his voice sharper than a blade and heavier than any command. Something in it made the tribes freeze, even in the middle of death. "Break into 3 groups," he shouted. "Form a crescent. Keep the beasts contained. Don't fight alone. Pair up. You, the spear throwers. Focus fire on the winged beasts." There was hesitation. But then, miraculously, they moved. Something about Helios' voice cut through fear like fire through darkness. He rushed to the left flank, rallying the scattered warriors. Swords to the front. Shields behind. Rotate every 10 seconds. Keep the beasts at bay. They formed crude phalanxes. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, especially since it was thought of by what can be described as a caveman. The monsters pushed. The humans held. Helios darted across the battlefield like a flame, reinforcing the weakest points, giving new commands, and adjusting formation. Where one flank wavered, he reinforced. Where another broke, he counterattacked. He climbed onto a fallen beast's corpse to see the battlefield. His mind raced, not just a warrior's mind, but something deeper. Tactical. Analytical. Thoughts that are different from the simple-mindedness of humans of this era. "Light the black liquid," he told one spear thrower group. "Set the ground ablaze. Cut off their advance." They obeyed. The monsters surged, and fire consumed them. Cheers erupted from the humans. But it wasn't enough. More beasts emerged from the hills, called by the scent of blood. Larger, deadlier. One had 3 heads and bone plates thicker than stone. Another screeched, and a group of humans bled from their ears. Helios' men screamed. Some ran, others cried. "If this continues, they will surely get annihilated." "We fall back," Helios ordered, panting. "Crescent formation, retreat eastward. Take the wounded first. Burn the ground behind us." The tribes followed, not questioning anymore. Helios guided them like a conductor of war, leading a chaotic orchestra through hell. They retreated slowly, every step costing lives, but the line held. And when the last warrior crossed the valley ridge, Helios turned one final time to face the horde. His sword was broken. His armor dented. His eyes, however, were still lit with fire. "We'll be back," he whispered, voicing a promise to the gods and monsters alike. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the smoke with the last hope of mankind. Night had fallen. The flicker of torches barely pierced the darkness that wrapped the mountainside like a funeral shroud. Hidden behind a cascade of stone and vines, in a large secluded cave, the surviving humans huddled together, bloodied, broken, but not defeated. Moans of the wounded echoed faintly through the chamber as healers moved swiftly, treating torn flesh and setting broken bones with crude tools and whispered prayers. Children cried softly in the corners, comforted by tired mothers. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, blood, and the unshakable tension of what they had just survived. At the far end of the cave, beneath the dim glow of a single burning brazier, the tribe leaders gathered. 11 of them, cloaked in fur and bearing the marks of warriors, sat in a circle carved into the stone floor, their faces lined with weariness and ash. No one spoke for a long moment. Then, an elder with braided gray hair and a broken spear leaning against his shoulder broke the silence. "We were lucky to survive." Murmurs of agreement followed. "Yeah. I didn't think we'd actually survive," another muttered. "If it wasn't for Helios, we probably would have been eaten by those beasts." All heads slowly turned to Helios, who stood nearby with his arms crossed, gazing at the map he'd carved into the cave floor with the charred end of a sword. "Even though we fought together, we lacked coordination," said a younger chief, rubbing dried blood from his hands. "The chaos and different voices shouting commands confused our people." "I," said another, voice firm. "I think we should officially unite as one. I'm sure everyone here knows that we'd all die if we scattered." One by one, the others nodded. The elder rose slowly, his joints creaking like old bark. "Then, it is time," he said. "It's time we stop pretending we can survive this age alone. Our ancestors divided the land and splintered the people, but that time is over. Today, we fight for more than just our own kind. We fight for all mankind." He turned to Helios. "You have shown what a leader looks like, and that is not to have just strength but also wisdom. Not just valor, but also vision. We would have been slaughtered without you." "I agree," said a broad-shouldered woman with a scar across her cheek. "I saw how you moved across the battlefield. You gave hope when there was none." "I watched you save my daughter," whispered another, eyes misty. "You didn't even know who she was. But you shielded her with your own body. That is the kind of leader we need." All eyes turned again to Helios. He met each gaze, his heart heavy. "I am only one man," he said at last, voice steady. "I bled with you. I lost friends with you. I did what I must to survive. Nothing more." "You did more than that," said the elder. "You led us." Silence followed. After a few minutes, Helios finally nodded. "Very well. If this is what you believe, then I will lead." A cheer rose, faint at first, then growing. The leaders all stood, placing their weapons in a ring at Helios' feet, a sign of allegiance and respect. That night, the humans gathered as one. The wounded were propped up, the children carried, and the old brought forward to witness history. Helios stepped onto a stone outcropping inside the cave and raised his voice. "Today," he declared, "we bury our tribes. Today, we are no longer 11 scattered tribes. Today, we become one tribe. One people. One flame." A roar of agreement filled the cavern. "We will fight together," he continued. "We will forge weapons together. We will teach our children the art of war, and we will not bow to the gods nor the monsters who hunt us. We will rise and survive." He raised his hand, and in it, a torch blazed with fire. "From this day forward, we are the Ithas tribe, in honor of the divine who defied the gods and gave us the sacred flame." The humans raised their voices and weapons, and in that sacred moment, beneath the stone and stars, the first step to the building of mankind's first nation was taken. In the Underworld, in Hades' floating fortress. A projection hovered before Hades and Aphrodite. In it, flickering and alive, was the image of humanity. They had survived. More than that, they had united. Helios, now leader of the newly formed tribe of Flame, stood atop stone, his people cheering, fire blazing behind him as symbols of their defiance against annihilation. From his dark throne, Hades leaned forward, his chin resting on his knuckles. His stern face betrayed little emotion, but his eyes, normally cold as obsidian, held a flicker of light. "It begins," he murmured. The beginning of a city, no, a civilization. The first time mankind looks beyond mere survival and toward legacy. A soft rustle came from beside him. Aphrodite, draped in a flowing silken gown that shimmered like starlight, sat comfortably on a divan near the edge of the scrying pool. Her golden eyes gleamed with mirth, and the faintest smile played on her lips. "They are a really stubborn bunch," she said. "I thought they would scatter like frightened deer after that battle." "They almost did," Hades replied. "But Helios held them together. He really deserves to be their leader." Aphrodite watched as a group of human children passed stones to help build a crude wall, their laughter echoing faintly through the vision. A moment passed. Aphrodite rose and walked toward him, placing a gentle hand on the armrest of his obsidian throne. Her touch was warm against the cold stone. "You really like them." "Maybe," Hades admitted. "They remind me that power isn't always forged in birthright or divine might. Sometimes, it's forged in hardship and struggle." Yes, just like he was back then. Desperate for power. She tilted her head. "Do you think the other gods will care?" He smirked. "Not yet. But they will. When cities rise. When temples are built. When prayers echo across the mountains and rivers, they will care. And when that happens," she said, "they'll try to claim them." "I won't let them," Hades said, voice sharp as a drawn blade. "These mortals deserve to rise by their own hands, not be puppets to divine whims." Aphrodite gazed back at the image of Helios giving orders, firelight dancing across his determined face. "They are beautiful in their own way." "Indeed," Hades agreed. And so, in the quiet of the underworld, the god of the dead and the goddess of beauty watched the dawn of human civilization, not as distant deities, but as silent guardians of the flame now burning in mortal hearts. In the ever-twilight realm of the underworld, where shadows whispered and souls passed in silence, a rare warmth bloomed by the banks of the river Lethe. The river, ever calm, shimmered faintly under the faint glow of blue lantern flames that floated above the dining pavilion. The tranquility of this day was not born from magic or divine command, but from the collective decision of gods and goddesses to simply rest. Hades and his secretaries have been too tired lately, so they needed to relax. A long obsidian table stretched across a flat terrace by the river, its surface polished until it reflected the faces of those seated around it. The air was cool and still, filled only with the gentle sound of Lethe's waters trickling by and the occasional laughter of godly voices. Hades, lord of the underworld, sat at the head of the table. Dressed in dark silks embroidered with silver thorns, his usually solemn face was softened by something uncharacteristic, contentment. He held a delicate goblet carved from soul crystal, filled with a wine fermented in the depths of Tartarus. Beside him, Aphrodite lounged with her elbow resting on the table, her long golden hair tied into a messy braid that trailed over her shoulder. She was barefoot, her sandals tossed carelessly nearby, her demeanor relaxed and teasing. "So," Aphrodite began, swirling her drink with mischief in her golden eyes, "does every meal in the underworld come with background wailing, or is that just the ambience?" This is the first time since she came here that she participated in the rare picnic of Hades and friends. "That's the screams of the condemned," Styx replied dryly, tossing a few fruits to her mouth. "You get used to it. Like the sound of wind in the overworld." Aphrodite chuckled. "Charming." On Hades' other side, Hecate was calmly dissecting a glowing mushroom with silver utensils, her expression one of intense interest. It said the river Lethe carries memories. People who drank from it would have their memories erased and stored in the river. Lethe, the river's personification, leaned back in her seat with a distant smile. "Yes, that's a recent addition. Lord Hades wanted those memories to be made into books so his library would keep expanding." "Speaking of forgetting, I'd pay good drachma to forget certain things," said Demeter, eyes showing anger as she remembered things of the past. She wanted to forget about how Zeus and Poseidon tried to lay their hands on her. Really, if not for her twin sickles, which made her able to fend off his brothers. Minth, seated between Lethe and Demeter, noticed Demeter's foul mood and changed the subject. "Hey, Aphrodite." Aphrodite, who was about to put a pomegranate in her mouth, suddenly stopped and stared back. "Don't you dare eat anything from Underworld or you'll be stuck as an Underworld goddess." Aphrodite simply smiled and laughed. "It doesn't really matter, does it? I never leave to pay Nemphire Rachmum. Demeter huffed but couldn't hide her amusement. Or maybe it just responds to your stubbornness. Call it passion, Mint said sweetly, sipping a glass of pomegranate nectar. Hades leaned slightly toward Aphrodite, who had begun braiding a tiny wreath from Lethe lilies. You're awfully sociable, he said. That's a rare phenomenon. She smirked. I'm watching. Taking in your little family. It's sweet. And weird. But mostly sweet. Her eyes sparkled. Who would have guessed that the Underworld has picnic days? Don't speak too loud, Styx muttered. If the souls hear we're enjoying ourselves, they'll riot. They all laughed at that, even Lethe, whose laughter was like the breeze passing over calm water, barely audible, but beautiful nonetheless. Suddenly, a ghostly soul drifted too close to the perimeter. Hecate raised a finger and gently redirected it with a spark of purple magic, sending it floating away with a dazed expression. Occupational hazard, she said calmly. Aphrodite stood, stretched luxuriously, and walked barefoot over to the riverbank. Her hair caught the light like fireflies as she stared at the water. Do they still drink from you, Lethe? She asked curiously. Every day, Lethe replied, her voice layered with an old beg for forgetfulness. Others fear it. But all who pass here eventually drink. That's terrifying, Aphrodite said. Yes, but necessary, Hades replied, joining her. Mortals can't enter their next life carrying the weight of the last. Even pain must fade. Aphrodite glanced at him. And what about us gods? Do we forget? No, Hades said with a faint smile. We remember too much. Minth and Demeter had gone into a quiet debate about underworld soil composition, while Styx calmly judged them both, sipping from her flask of water sourced directly from her river. Hecate was etching something into her plate with her fork, likely a sigil or a spell out of boredom. Lethe, meanwhile, stared into her own reflection on the river. Even I, she whispered, wish I could forget, sometimes. Hades heard her, but he said nothing. A silence settled over the group, not heavy, but thoughtful. It didn't last long. All right, Aphrodite broke it with her usual tact. If anyone here still remembers how to dance, I propose we do it. Right now. I refuse to let a picnic in the underworld end without at least one waltz. I don't dance, Styx said immediately. I do, said Lethe, surprising them all. Aphrodite grinned. Then we'll start with the river herself. And so they danced, beside the waters of forgetting. Gods and goddesses, old and eternal, who had seen the rise and fall of ages, finding, if only for a fleeting moment, peace. Even in the underworld. Even surrounded by the dead. They laughed. They danced. At this moment, they simply enjoyed themselves. High above the clouds, where lightning danced and winds howled in reverence, the golden halls of Olympus glimmered beneath the divine sun. At the center of it all, on a dais carved from celestial marble and veined with pure stormlight, Zeus sat tall upon his throne, lightning crown aglow, eyes thunderous with pride. Before him, a semicircle of kneeling gods awaited his proclamation. Trumpets of wind and eagle cries echoed through the great hall as the king of the gods rose, arms wide, voice rolling like distant thunder. Let the heavens bear witness, he declared, for today, the Council of 12 shall be complete. Olympus shall shine in divine order once more. The kneeling gods raised their heads slightly as Zeus began his decree, golden light flaring from his hands. To my children, Apollo and Artemis, born of fair Leto, loyal and mighty, you shall take your place among the 12. Apollo, Lord of Light, and Artemis, Huntress of the Moon. Let your thrones rise beside mine. 2 new thrones emerged with a rumble, forged from white gold and carved moonstone, radiant in their symmetry. Next, Zeus turned toward the armored figures beside them. Athena, child of wisdom, born from Métis, though she emerged from her mother's mind, she is of Olympus blood. And Ares, bold and wrathful, forged in war. Let both stand as gods of strategy and strength. The realm shall need both mind and muscle. Another pair of thrones rose, one of cold iron laced with rubies, the other of pristine marble etched with ancient scripts. Dionysus, Zeus said with a smirk, raising a goblet of wine, you, child of revelry, of madness and joy, you make Olympus louder, stranger, but never dull. Your gifts bring laughter and release. And your wine is divine. Take your throne. A chair of polished grapevine would burst forth, trailing ivy and laughter as Dionysus grinned ear to ear. Astrea, Zeus continued, daughter of Astreus, who stood beside me when Titans raged, I honor your father's loyalty through you. Goddess of justice, you shall carry the weight of balance among us. Her throne appeared next, formed of starlight and scales, silent and serene. Hephaestus, he said next, glancing toward the limping god of fire and forge. Born of Métis, shaped by will alone. The one who crafts our arms, our halls, and our legends. Olympus needs your hands. Hephaestus bowed deeply, and a mighty throne of molten bronze and cooled iron erupted in a cloud of sparks. And then, with a dramatic pause, Zeus turned to the side. And of course, your king, your Stormbringer. Myself. Thunder crackled overhead. Beside me, my loyal brother, Poseidon, lord of the sea. My sister, Hestia, heart of Olympus. My queen, Métis, source of wisdom and mother of divine minds. With those final names, the thrones of seafoam coral, eternal flame, and crystalline thought completed the circle. 12 thrones. 12 gods. The Olympian Council is now complete. Zeus bellowed. A surge of divine power pulsed through the hall. Olympus trembled with affirmation. But just as the applause rose, a minor god stepped forward nervously. Lord Zeus, what of Lady Hera? And Lady Demeter? The skies darkened for a moment. Zeus scowled, waving a dismissive hand. They failed to attend even a single meeting. What use are gods who do not act? Let them wander. Olympus has no room for the idle. The assembly was quiet for a moment. Then Zeus raised his arms again. Let us celebrate the 12. Let their names echo through the mortal realms. Let Olympus thrive, united under the might of its gods. The forest air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as Helios marched through the foliage, flanked by his loyal warriors. The morning sun filtered through the branches above, casting shifting patterns of light onto the forest floor. The group tread carefully, alert for monsters or wild beasts. Though the war against the beasts had lessened in intensity, their presence was still felt, lurking, waiting. So a daily patrol was a necessity, and as a leader, Helios believes that it is his duty to ensure the well-being of his people and personally leads the patrol group. Just then, the group heard rustling. Helios signaled for them to keep quiet and lower themselves. However, Helios himself made a move, observing the source of the sound. It was then that Helios paused. His warriors, who were told to keep quiet and remain still, stared at him, confused, gripping their bronze spears. Leader, one of them asked, scanning the area for threats. But Helios said nothing. His eyes were fixed on something small and unassuming, a squirrel, busying itself around a log that had fallen against a pair of rocks. The creature darted in and out, carrying nuts and sticks, tucking them inside the hollowed wood. Helios watched it as if he were looking at a god. He's watching a squirrel, one warrior whispered. A god-chosen squirrel, another asked. No, Helios said suddenly, breaking his silence. Look at it. It made a home. The men blinked. Helios turned to them, eyes sharp with clarity. We live in a cave. And that cave is not ours. We found it. But this creature, it made a place of its own. With what nature gave it. A hush fell over the warriors. Helios pointed to a cluster of trees. We'll cut those. Bring them back. Confusion rippled through the group. You want us to bring trees? One man asked. Yes. Logs, branches, anything we can carry. Hurry. Although still uncertain, they obeyed. Helios watched them move, smiling to himself. The cave they lived in was too small and cramped, but they endured it because there really aren't any suitable caves to live in. But now, if they can actually make their own shelters, they wouldn't have to worry about being overcrowded. Back at the cave, the entrance now crowded with the injured, elders, and children, the returning warriors brought heaps of wood. The other tribe leaders, now sworn under Helios' banner, gathered near the center of the cavern. Firelight danced on the walls as they listened to Helios explain his vision. A man-made shelter? Muttered one of the former leaders, a tall and burly man of a hunting tribe. Out of trees. Yes, Helios said. The cave is too small. One spark and we all die of smoke. The gods gave us hands and eyes. Why not build like the beasts do? But better. In fact, at night, because they couldn't light the fire in the cave, they simply huddled together to keep themselves warm. Silence. Then murmurs. Isn't this madness? No. It could work. Even the gods live in palaces, Helios added. Shall we crawl in caves while calling ourselves their children? The leaders exchanged glances. Finally, the elder woman, once matron of a powerful warrior tribe, spoke. Let us try. Better to fail in progress than rot in cowardice. The others, though looking uncertain, still agreed to support Helios. After all, if it succeeds, they don't need to rely on caves to survive. As long as there are trees, they can live anywhere. And so, they began. For days, men and women hauled logs. They tried stacking them, tying them with vines, and leaning them against one another. Each attempt collapsed. One such failure flattened a young man's foot, causing screams and panic. Helios, frustrated but relentless, paced near the now fallen pile of wood as the other tribe members looked disappointed. That was when a lanky youth named Veles, a known troublemaker, timidly raised his hand. El leader. I have something to say. Helios raised his head and stared at him, causing Veles to flinch. Go on. Helios smiled, nodding at him. Veles sighed in relief, thinking that the chieftain wasn't as cold or emotionless as he appears. Leader, I saw some children playing the other day. They made something from twigs. A triangle. It stood longer than anything we've built. Helios narrowed his eyes. A triangle? Yes. Several sticks piled up in the shape of a triangle. It stood, balanced, held itself up. Helios' eyes narrowed. A triangle? Made from sticks? He thought it ridiculous. A branch and logs aren't the same as a stick. Surely, the branch would be far too heavy and it would collapse on itself. And yet, try it, Helios commanded. Why not give it a try? They've tried doing this thing for days with no result. So why don't they try something new? So with his orders, the workers arranged 3 logs into a triangle, binding their tops with vines, added a few more supports, and covered it with leaves. It held on. This shocked and excited Helios, along with other humans who stared at the shelter. With a shout, he ordered another to be made. Then another. And another. By the time the sun set for the evening, a row of triangular structures stood outside the cave, like primitive tents. Cheers erupted. Children danced. Women wept. Even the gruffest warriors stared in awe. One of the old chieftains muttered, "They are ugly." "But they are ours," Helios said, placing a hand on the structure. "No god built this for us. We did." And thus, the first shelters of humankind were born, not out of divine intervention, but out of observation, innovation, and hope. Humanity, once scattered and hunted, had taken another step. They were becoming builders. Becoming a true civilization. Underworld, core section, hanging fortress of Pluto. From the balcony of his dark citadel, Hades watched the flickering soul lights far below. But today, his gaze was drawn to a projection. A small smile played at the corner of his lips as he saw Helios and the humans beginning their next great step, shelter. It was clumsy, primitive, and crude. But it was creation. And in a world so often defined by destruction, that was no small feat. It won't be long, and Hades was sure that they'll discover farming, fishing, and herding and eventually become a kingdom. Just then, a gentle disturbance of shadows signaled the arrival of someone familiar. "My lord," said Hecate, her voice soft yet stern, flowing like smoke in the wind. "Everyone has arrived and gathered. We can begin now." Hades gave a slow nod, his hand brushing back the edge of his midnight cloak as he waved his hand, causing the projection to disappear. "Very well. Let us proceed." The two walked side by side through the twisting halls of Hades' hanging fortress. The walls shimmered faintly with the echo of souls, and the floor reflected nothing, a subtle reminder that this was a place where even shadows could be consumed. At the end of the corridor, a tall door of black iron groaned open. Inside stood 11 figures, arranged evenly on both sides of a central path leading to a throne carved from pure obsidian. The figures turned toward the sound of the door and, without needing to be told, stood to attention. Their presence filled the room with weight, raw authority, ancient power, and primal will. Hades entered slowly, his footfalls echoing in rhythmic silence. As he approached the throne, the 12, including Hecate, who now stood at the end, dropped to one knee and bowed their heads. Praise be to the god of the underworld. You may rise. They obeyed. The obsidian throne gleamed slightly beneath Hades' divinity, causing many to feel a sense of awe. His eyes swept across the room. Each god bore a unique aura. Hecate, the first among them, glowed with ancient arcane power. She stood calmly, her hand holding a lamp as she stared at Hades. Next was Hera, Hades' sister, and the self-proclaimed queen of the underworld. The goddess of marriage is in charge of the underworld's internal affairs. Beside her stood Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty now cloaked in darker silks, her charm undiminished by the dim realm she now called home. Her smile held unique beauty as she nodded to Hades. Then came the 5 river gods, Acheron, Lethe, Phlegethon, Cocytus, and Styx, each embodying the great rivers of death. They radiated the essences of pain, forgetfulness, flame, lamentation, and oath, and governed the outer and inner sections of the underworld with unwavering efficiency. Thanatos, the silent reaper, stood with arms crossed. His black robe barely moved, as if even the air dared not disturb him. Eris, goddess of discord, grinned from her place. Chaos simmered beneath her calm expression, but she had proven to be a valuable tool for rooting out threats. Beside her stood the twin of death, Charis, whose crimson eyes burned with hunger for battle. She was a warhound barely leashed, her role critical during mass soul intake from great conflicts above. Finally, Hypnos, god of sleep, leaned lazily against his post, blinking slowly as if he'd just awakened. But when called upon, he could put even armies of the damned to eternal slumber. The 12 patrons of Hades. The strongest gods and guardians of Hades, who also holds the responsibility to manage the underworld affairs. Even the most unruly god has to obey them. You are my patrons, Hades said. His voice filled the room without rising. Each of you governs a piece of this realm. While Olympus squabbles over thrones and vanity, we build what must last for eternity. He looked to Styx. The influx of wicked souls? Styx bowed. Growing. We can't send them all to Tartarus, so I created a new containment ward and some are drowned in the rivers of Cocytus and Phlegethon. Hades nodded before turning towards the god of death, Thanatos. Humanity resists death less but dies more frequently. Their fear has lessened, perhaps due to the fire Prometheus gifted. Aphrodite, Hades said, shifting slightly. You've seen them through a new lens. Have their hearts changed? Aphrodite stepped forward, her golden eyes bright even in the gloom. Love has bloomed in strange places, my lord. Fear binds them, but so does hope. It's fascinating. Hades gave a thoughtful nod. He looked over the rest. Continue your work. This realm shall not falter while Olympus drowns in wine and pride. Hecate stepped forward. Shall we begin planning for the next phase? The city of the dead must grow with them. Hades gave a faint smile. Indeed. Let us plan. And thus, in the cold depths of the underworld, beneath the world of men and gods, the true empire began its next chapter, not ruled by thunder or vanity, but by shadow, silence, and order. Time passed, silent and relentless. In the realm of the dead, where decades felt like mere echoes of breath, Hades maintained his peaceful life. Within his private sanctum at the heart of his hanging fortress, Hades stood alone, bathed in the pale glow of an ancient scrying mirror. A projection shimmered in the void before him, revealing the world above. There, the sun cast its golden crown over a land that once knew only wilderness, blood, and fire. But now it bore the mark of civilization. The humans had changed. Hades watched as heroes, older now but still proud and firm, oversaw the planting of grain fields beyond the city wall. The humans had discovered the art of agriculture. No longer did they wander as starving prey. They had tamed the land, feeding themselves not from the hunt, but from the soil itself. It had begun with trial and error, but Helios, ever the patient leader, observed and learned. He led his people in planting seeds, irrigating land, and storing grain for the winter moons. Beyond the fields, fishermen dragged net after net from the river, smiling with the satisfaction of success. Herds of goats and sheep grazed in the meadows, guided by children with sticks and songs. A city had risen from dust and bones. Brick by brick, stone by stone, Helios and his people had laid the foundation of the first true human civilization. The caves were long abandoned, now only whispered about in stories told beside a fire. Their new homes were sturdy structures of clay bricks hardened by the sun. Streets crisscrossed in rudimentary patterns. Wells had been dug. A gathering hall now stood at the center, where Helios met with his council, formed from the former tribal leaders who had long since cast aside their rivalries. And above all of this towered the walls, massive by human standards. For watchtowers crowned the corners of the square city, each man day and night. Monsters still roamed the wilds, but the city, the polis, had stood unbroken for over a generation. Hades watched it all. A slow smile crept across his face. A city, he murmured. The first, and certainly not the last. He placed a hand upon the projection, fingers brushing the shimmering image of Helios instructing young boys how to fortify the western wall. You've done well, mortal. You carry the flame Prometheus gave and turned it into a beacon. The vision shimmered and faded, returning the chamber to darkness. With a faint sigh, Hades turned back to his obsidian desk, stacked with records of souls, disputes among the spirits, and new laws being drafted to organize the ever-growing afterlife. He picked up a scroll, eyes scanning through the report brought in by a divine spirit, an incident near the border of Lethe where a forgotten soul had gone mad and nearly disrupted a fairy line. But his mind still lingered above, in the mortal world. He had seen countless races rise and fall, beasts, titans, even divine spirits who tried to claim land as their own. But humans were something different. Fragile, short-lived, impulsive, and yet driven by something no other being possessed in the same measure. Hope. Not the divine kind, not the blind worship of fate, but the kind forged in mud and blood. The hope that even in a hostile, God-haunted world, they could survive and thrive. A soft knock echoed against the stone door. It creaked open, revealing Hypnos leaning on the door frame, half asleep. "My lord," the god of slumber mumbled. "Preparations for your trip are ready." Hades nodded, rolling the scroll in his hand. "I'll be there shortly." As Hypnos disappeared into mist, Hades cast one last glance at the now dark mirror. The age of gods still reigned, but the age of men had begun. And deep in his chest, buried beneath years of judgment, rule, and darkness, Hades felt something stir. A quiet, unfamiliar pride. But for now, he will observe his realm under a disguise. High above the mortal realm, far from the sins of men and the pride of gods, Gaia sat atop the great mountain whose name was lost to time. The eternal Earth Mother, older than titans and gods alike, stirred in silence as her eyes peered through the veils of distance and cloud. Her gaze was fixed on Mount Olympus. Once a sacred peak, now a throne of vanity and excess. The Olympians, once her grandchildren born of divine promise, had become decadent rulers of a realm they barely understood. They drank ambrosia till their minds grew dull and turned their divine halls into dens of pleasure and arrogance. The earth beneath Olympus cried. The rivers refused to sing. And the sacred air that once swirled with awe now carried only the stench of sin. Gaia's lips curled into a rare frown. They were worse than the Titans. The Titans, though prideful and cruel in the end, still followed the natural order. But the Olympians had no respect for balance or burden. They crowned themselves kings and queens of the world, yet knew nothing of the soil they ruled. "No more," Gaia whispered, her voice echoing through caverns and cliffsides, sending tremors across the roots of the world. She considered punishment. Not with storms or fire, not with curses or decay. No, she wanted something greater. A reckoning. A new race that would not only survive but also humble the gods. A being strong enough to remind the Olympians of their place in the cosmic order. Her instincts urged her to birth such a child on her own, as she once birthed the Cyclops, the Titans, and the Hundred-Handed Ones. But she hesitated. If she birthed this being alone, its power would be vast but limited. It would lack balance. It would burn too bright and die too quickly. This time, she needed a counterpart. A force that could temper her chaos with structure and that could balance her primordial nature with reason, strength, and sovereignty. She searched her ancient memory, pondering all who might serve. Tartarus? No. Too silent. Too proud. Too impure. Hydros? A fool, more beast than god, always ruled by impulse. None of the primordials were worthy. As she pondered for a more suitable partner, she remembered one. A quiet man who rules the land in the deepest part of the earth. The Underworld. Where the dead walked with purpose, and shadows bowed to order. A place not of chaos, but of calm inevitability. And its king, a god who never sought glory, yet ruled with unmatched power and respect. Hades. Not just a god. The strongest god. The only Olympian who did not defile the world. The only one who respected his domain and kept balance within it. He did not meddle in mortal affairs. He did not violate sacred grounds. He did not seek love, power, or worship. But Gaia knew, he was the key. She sat up slowly, the mountain quaking beneath her as ancient vines uncoiled around her body. If he joins me, she whispered, then this new being will be like no other. Not Titan. Not God. Not mortal. But a reckoning. A divine judgment born from the earth and the grave. A child to make Olympus tremble. With the wind shifting and the stars dimming, Gaia vanished into the earth, seeking a path down into the shadows of the underworld. She would speak to Hades. And offer him the most dangerous proposal in the history of the cosmos. The sun cast its golden rays over the bustling city of Harion, the first human city-state forged under the leadership of Helios. Within the city's central hall, Helios was engrossed in administrative duties, addressing matters ranging from resource allocation to defense strategies. The city's growth had been rapid, with advancements in agriculture, construction, and governance. However, the peace was abruptly interrupted when a breathless scout burst into the hall, his face pale with urgency. Lord Helios, the scout gasped, kneeling before the leader. Our patrols have observed an alarming phenomenon. Monsters are amassing in the northern territories, forming what appears to be a beast tide. Helios's eyes narrowed, the weight of the news settling heavily upon him. He immediately summoned his council, composed of former tribal leaders who had united under his banner. The council convened in the war chamber, a room adorned with maps and strategic plans. As the council members took their seats, Helios addressed the scout. Report your findings in detail. The scout stood, his voice steady despite the gravity of his message. While on routine patrol, I noticed a sudden absence of wildlife, a silence that was unsettling. Driven by concern, I ventured beyond our usual perimeter. There, I witnessed a congregation of beasts unlike any we've seen. They were numerous, their eyes filled with bloodlust, and their movements coordinated. A murmur spread through the council. One member leaned forward. Can you estimate their numbers? The scout shook his head. Their numbers are vast, too many to count. They stretch across the horizon, a sea of claws and fangs. Another counselor inquired, where exactly are they gathering? In the northern plains, near the old forest boundary, the scout replied. Helios stood, his expression resolute. Sound the horns. Mobilize our forces. We must prepare for war. The council members nodded, understanding the urgency. The city's defenses were activated, with soldiers taking their positions along the walls. Archers prepared their bows, and the blacksmiths worked tirelessly to forge weapons. Citizens were instructed to seek shelter, and healers readied their supplies. Helios, clad in his armor, addressed the assembled troops. We face a formidable enemy, but we stand united. Our city, our people, and our future depend on our courage and strength. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the city, the distant growls and howls of the approaching beast tide echoed through the air. The battle for Harion was about to begin. The underworld was vast. Contrary to the old beliefs of mortals, it was now not just a land of shadows and suffering. Under the firm hand of Hades, it had become a realm of structure, layered, organized, and filled with countless cities and biomes. From the volcanic depths of the infernal mountains to the golden plains of the reincarnation fields, each corner of the underworld reflected the complexity of death itself. In the inner section of the realm, where virtuous souls and divine spirits dwelled, stood a region blanketed in eternal frost. Known as Glacium Noctis, it was a tundra biome inhabited by gods and spirits of ice, snow, and stillness. Here, the silence was sacred. Pale blue skies loomed over cities of carved sapphire and crystalline towers, and auroras danced slowly overhead, casting light across endless fields of snow. On a narrow bench beneath a towering ice tree whose frozen branches shimmered with silver frost, a lone traveler sat cloaked in gray. No one paid him much attention. After all, travelers came and went often, dead souls from distant cultures, divine spirits seeking peace, and the occasional god in exile. But this one, he was different. It was Hades, disguised. His divine aura was tightly bound and hidden. Even the most sensitive spirits around him could not tell what he was. For weeks now, he had wandered his own realm, inspecting cities, walking among the dead, and sitting beside the weary. He observed the lives of those under his rule not as a king, but as a quiet man of patience and thought. This was his way. He had visited the floating gardens of the Windward City, walked the obsidian streets of Vantal where the void spirits meditated, and even dined with an elderly shade who claimed to have been a poet in life. But now, his steps had brought him to Glacium Noctis, to the serene bench beneath the ice tree. It was here, amidst the gentle hum of cold wind and the soft whisper of frost, that something shifted. A presence stirred beside him, soft, ancient, heavy with the weight of creation itself. The air thickened. The snow beneath his boots trembled. Hades turned his gaze slowly. Beside him stood a woman, barefoot on the snow yet untouched by the cold. Her hair flowed like wild roots and rivers of stone, her skin was as rich as that of fertile soil, and her eyes were like deep wells of emerald fire. The scent of life, of earth and storms and mountain breath, surrounded her like a crown. Gaia, Hades said, voice neutral but respectful. The primordial of earth smiled gently, as if she had been waiting for him to notice her. Hades, she greeted, her tone smooth and deliberate. It's been long since we last spoke without divine noise between us. He nodded once and turned his eyes back to the snowy horizon, though his mind sharpened with alertness. Usually, when a primordial steps into my realm, he said slowly, it means something troubling is coming. Gaia chuckled, a low, ancient sound that vibrated through the ground. Must you always greet me like I'm the herald of doom? Experience tells me yes. Her smile faded slightly. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The only sound was the faint crackling of ice in the wind. I've watched you, Gaia finally said. Ruling from the shadows, rarely asking for glory. Your underworld thrives while Olympus wallows. Hades said nothing. They mock you. Yet it is you who build cities. You who tame monsters. You who understands what it means to hold responsibility. She looked at him then. You are the only one among your brothers worthy of the title king. Hades remained still. And Gaia tilted her head, as if measuring his soul. I'm angry, Hades. The Olympians dance and drink upon sacred land that once pulsed with my power. They sully it with their lust, their pride, and their negligence. He finally looked at her again, his eyes unreadable. So you've come to me. Why? I've decided to create a new race, Gaia said, voice low. A race not born of selfish gods nor birthed from my own body. One that will shake the Olympians. Humble them. Punish them if need be. Hades raised an eyebrow. And you want my help? I need your seed, she said plainly. You are the only god strong enough. Stable enough. You represent order, where the others only breed chaos. With you, I will create a being neither fully mine nor fully yours, but something greater than either. A deep silence fell between them. Hades looked out over the icy plains again, his thoughts veiled. The wind stirred his cloak as he pondered her request. He could have refused. He had refused her once. But life as a god has made his past memories dull. He couldn't even remember his past name. The only thing that reminds him that he was reborn is the scent of mint. So for the current him, he wasn't that adverse to procreation. Gaia did not press. She waited, timeless. Finally, Hades spoke. Creating life is no light matter. And the Olympians, they are not so easily humbled. You may start another war. Gaia's eyes glowed faintly green. Then let war come. And if your creation goes beyond what you intend, he asked. If it falls into darkness, as Cronus once did? Then we deal with it, she replied. As gods should. Hades sighed through his nose. Let me think. Gaia stood slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the snow. Take your time, she said. But do not take too long. The land suffers. And I do not forget those who hurt my body. She began to walk away, disappearing into the air like a breeze through the trees. Only the echo of her power remained, a whisper of earth, and the weight of purpose. Hades sat alone once more. The ice tree above him crackled. The wind returned. And the Lord of the Underworld leaned back slightly, gazing upward at the frozen branches as he considered what the future might bring. The sun had not yet risen, and the horizon glowed faintly with the promise of day, but there was no warmth in that light. Only dread. Helios stood upon the tall stone gate of his city, the first city ever built by humankind, carved through sweat, unity, and hope. Behind him, families huddled behind walls, terrified. Farmers held pitchforks with trembling hands. Children watched in silence. This city had become the last bastion of mankind's hope. Ahead of him stretched an ocean of monsters. Their howls cracked the air like thunder. Their bodies writhed in every form imaginable, scaled beasts, fanged giants, and crawling horrors with too many limbs and too little mind. A horde beyond counting, stretching from one end of the plains to the other. Helios narrowed his eyes. The cold morning wind carried the scent of blood. They've come, he muttered. At his side stood his captains, men and women who had once been chiefs of tribes now loyal to one banner. The banner of Helios. His armor was simple, nothing more than leather reinforced by iron plates, stained with battle, but upon his chest gleamed the sigil of the unified tribes, a flame rising from earth, surrounded by 12 stars. A horn sounded. 3 short bursts. Archers lined the walls, thousands of them, their arrows already nocked. Helios raised one hand, and the archers tensed. The monsters roared and surged forward. Fire, he commanded. 1,000 arrows darkened the sky and fell like divine judgment. Screeches of pain erupted as dozens of monsters fell in the front lines, pierced through scale and sinew. Again. Another volley. Third line, fire. A third volley. Still, the monsters charged, climbing over fallen kin with savage hunger. Spearmen, ready, bellowed Helios. The front lines on the wall stepped forward, large tower shields at their sides and thick spears leveled down. The city trembled under the force of the beastly tide crashing against its walls. And then, they began to climb. Hooked claws and monstrous limbs reached up. Ladders made of bone and hide were thrown against the stone. As they ascended, the air became filled with a clash of steel, screams of the dying, and the unrelenting snarls of monsters. Helios drew his sword. The sword that accompanied him ever since he was just a boy. Hold the line, he shouted, his voice thundering over the chaos. All around him, soldiers fought. Arrows ran dry. Men took up axes and spears, hacking down beasts that leapt from the walls like frenzied hounds. The walls of the city ran red. But Helios, he burned with determination. He saw the fear in his people's eyes. He saw their wavering stances. And so, with a fierce cry, he did what no one expected. He jumped. He leapt from the wall, sword first, landing amidst the monsters below like a storm-given flesh. His blade carved through bone and tendon. Every swing was a command, every death, a symbol. He fought not like a mun, but like a fury born from mankind's desperation. The soldiers on the wall watched in awe. Then, one by one, they leapt after him. Sons of fire, follow our leader, shouted a warrior. Strike with Helios. Hundreds jumped. A tide of human steel cascaded from the walls, crashing into the beast horde. It was war in its truest form, mud, blood, and chaos. Screams and snarls melded into one horrific chorus. Spears shattered, shields cracked, and men fell screaming under claws. But for every one that died, 2 more filled their place. Helios fought at the center, his armor cracked and bloodied, eyes glowing with determination. He hacked through a snake-headed brute and turned just in time to slice open a 2-headed wolf. But even he was beginning to tire. It was at that moment that the earth rumbled. Helios paused, panting, blood dripping from his blade. The battlefield seemed to slow as a massive shadow appeared on the horizon. It was colossal. A beast unlike the rest. Towering like a mountain. Its skin was black stone, covered in jagged crystals. Its mouth glowed with internal fire, and each footstep caused tremors that shook the very ground. Trees snapped beneath its steps like twigs, its 6 arms bulging with power. Agigenes, the 6-armed giant. The soldiers froze. Even the monsters hesitated. Helios stared, jaw clenched. So, the true threat shows itself. The beast raised its head, letting out a roar that shattered rock. It was intelligent. Its eyes gleamed not with animal rage, but with cruel intent. It scanned the battlefield until its gaze landed on Helios. Helios turned to his captains. Form the outer line. Archers, bring out the fire arrows. Slingers, black liquid pouches. They obeyed instantly. Order in the chaos. Faith in their leader. The archers lit their arrows, igniting the air with flame. Black liquid bombs were hurled toward the Titan's legs. As it stepped into the field, fire exploded around its feet. But it did not stop. The Agigenes smashed into the ranks, sending men and monsters alike flying. It crushed whole squads with its bulk, dragging burning wreckage behind it. Helios leapt forward. "Buy me time," he roared. He ran directly at the beast, ducking under a swinging limb and rolling across the mud. He climbed onto a ledge of fallen rock and leapt onto the giant's leg, driving his blade deep into its stony flesh. The monster howled in pain, stumbling back. From below, his warriors shouted, emboldened. Helios climbed higher, cutting with each motion, blood and fire trailing behind him. At the shoulder, he stabbed again, using the momentum to pull himself to its upper back. The giant thrashed, but Helios held on. "Now," he yelled. Archers fired. Firebombs exploded across the giant's body, weakening the crystalline plating. Helios plunged his sword between 2 jagged stones, piercing the glowing core just beneath. The giant screamed. With a final effort, Helios pulled his sword free and leapt off, landing hard in the dirt as the beast stumbled and fell. The ground trembled as it crashed. Silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, a cheer, raw and broken but rising, from the human soldiers. They had seen the impossible. And they had lived. Helios stood, barely. Blood poured from a wound at his side, and his breath was ragged. But he raised his sword high, only to stop as he stared at the Agigenes with horror. The 6-armed giant rose up, its eyes turning red in anger. Helios gulped. This battle was far from over. Underworld. High within the floating fortress that overlooked the core section of the Underworld, silence reigned. In a circular chamber surrounded by floating candles and drifting pages of ancient scrolls, HADES stood in the center of a glowing circle. Before her, a large projection flickered, an ethereal mirror that shimmered like a silver pool suspended in the air. It displayed the overworld in vivid detail, burning forests, bloodied earth, and crumbling fortresses. It showed them, the human mortals. Helios and his people. They fought desperately to survive, teeth bared against an endless night of monsters and cruelty. In the reflection, men and women fell defending crude stone walls. Children clung to their mothers. The sick lay curled beneath makeshift shelters as battle cries echoed above them. HADES watched without emotion, arms folded, her expression blank and pale as moonlight. To struggle so violently, she murmured, for a life so fragile. To her, they were little more than sparks in the dark, flickering, fleeting, and wholly beneath her notice. She was a goddess of the underworld, the mistress of magic, crossroads, and shadowed gateways. Her realm was the arcane, the forgotten, and the dead. These mortals, scrambling like insects across the dirt of a cursed world, were no concern of hers. But still, she watched. For only one reason. HADES had asked her to. She would not have spared the humans a glance were it not for her lord's quiet command. HADES had been watching them for decades, moved by something even she, his closest ally, could not quite grasp. Perhaps it was their defiance. Perhaps it was their struggle. Or perhaps it was simply that, in the silence of his kingdom, life, even fragile and fading, was a rare thing. "They are breaking," she said to no one. "And they will not last much longer." At that moment, without a sound, the air behind her shifted. The shadows coalesced. The candles flickered. HADES turned slightly, sensing a familiar presence stepping into the room. HADES had returned. Clad in a dark robe woven from the threads of midnight, his form seemed half ethereal, yet the pressure of his being was undeniable. His eyes, cold silver like the moon shining on still water, met hers. "You've returned," HADES said simply, her voice calm as ever. "I have," HADES replied, stepping to stand beside her. "I've seen much of the underworld." His gaze lifted toward the projection. "How are they?" "They are not faring well," HADES said, gesturing toward the image. "Their numbers dwindle with each moment. Their resources deplete. And Helios, I don't see him winning against the six-armed." HADES did not speak. He merely watched, eyes focused on the leader of humanity. In the projection, Helios was limping as he desperately tried to survive against the onslaught of the Gijnes. "He will not last," HADES said again. "Without help, even your chosen one cannot hold the tides forever." Still, HADES remained silent. "You care for them more than you let on," she continued, arching an eyebrow. "Even I can see it." "Indeed," HADES said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Hecate tilted her head. "I really can't see why you are so fixated on them. Let's just say, I don't want to lose something that is part of me, his humanity, that is. These humans are one of the reasons why he can still remember his origin. The life of that human from the future, which had started to fade, was clinging to him through them. He doesn't want to forget that." He stepped closer to the projection, and his reflection shimmered in the light. For a long moment, he studied the humans, so small from his power, yet so fierce in their resolve. Hecate turned away. "I've watched them. I've studied them. They are resourceful, yes, and stubborn beyond measure. But they are mortal. Weak. If the beasts do not destroy them, time will. Without help, maybe." She blinked. "Are you suggesting we intervene?" HADES was silent for a time. Then he stepped forward and waved his hand over the projection. A new image formed, Helios soldiers, all armed and supporting him, distracting the Gijnes. "They believe in him," she said softly. "He has earned it," HADES said. They stood in silence, watching the mortal world burn and rebuild itself in cycles of war and will. Finally, Hecate sighed. "I shall look after them." "Thank you," HADES said simply. She glanced at him with a rare flicker of emotion. "Only because it's you." Guess not even you can resist my charm, huh?" She did not answer. Instead, she waved a hand again, expanding the projection, showing dozens of human tribes now forming across distant lands. Some fell to beasts. Some fell to famine. But others endured. And soon, they will grow and form their own civilization. "Let us see," HADES smiled, "what humanity will make of the world they inherit." And beside him, for the first time, Hecate's eyes softened. Just a little. "Let us see," she echoed. The ground shook. Boulders rained from the sky like angry meteors, flattening homes, crushing towers, and scattering men like ants. Each impact sent tremors through the massive stone walls of the city, now smeared with blood and fire. Helios stood, soaked in grime and sweat, staring out at the monster responsible, the monster he thought he had taken down. The Gijnes, a six-armed titan of war, its skin like cracked granite, its muscles bulging with divine fury, strode through the battlefield, each step a death knell. With two of its arms, it heaved massive boulders toward the city. With the others, it crushed and swatted the soldiers who dared get close. It was strong. "Keep the archers focused on the flanks," he roared, ducking just as a chunk of stone crashed into the ground, blasting a massive crater into the earth. Dust clouded the air. Screams followed. Helios stumbled, coughing, then pushed himself up. His armor was battered and painted in blood that was not entirely his own. His sword, a loyal companion through 100 skirmishes, was chipped but still clenched in his fist. "Chief!" a voice shouted from below. "The beast, it's destroying everything. We can't hold on." Helios didn't respond immediately. He turned, watching as the Gijnes lifted another boulder, hurling it into the heart of the city. The impact split a house in two, the shockwave throwing men from rooftops. Helios' expression darkened. Around him, his soldiers faltered, facing not just the titan but waves of beasts, wolf creatures with flame-soaked hides, serpents slithering between the cracks in the earth, and flying horrors clawing through the sky. Helios sprinted through the chaos, barking orders as he passed. "Hold the line at the gate." Shield the wounded. Send a rider to the east quarter. We need backup there. He didn't stop. He couldn't. The Gijnees loomed over the battlefield like a mountain made flesh. Its laughter rumbled like thunder. Form up around me, he ordered, running straight toward the giant. A squad of warriors, what was left of his elite guard, rallied at his sides, spears and axes drawn. They surged forward as one. The giant saw them coming. With a roar that resounded throughout the sky, it smashed two fists into the ground, creating a shockwave that scattered Hirio's men. The ground cracked open. One soldier was hurled into the air, landing in a heap with limbs twisted unnaturally. Another cried out as a rock struck his head and drove him into darkness. But Helios pushed on. He darted between falling debris, dodging the monstrous feet that sought to crush him. He climbed the broken rubble of a watchtower, launching himself from its height toward the monster's chest. His sword slashed, scoring a gash across one of the Titan's shoulders. The Gijnees screamed in pain and rage. 3 of its massive arms lunged for him at once. Helios twisted through them, landing hard on the beast's arm, sprinting along its limb like a bridge. But as he raised his blade for another strike, the monster shifted and caught him midair. The giant's hand closed around Helios like a vice. Bones creaked. Blood dripped from his lips. With a guttural growl, the Gijnees flung him across the battlefield. Helios smashed into the base of a scorched tree. His sword flew from his grasp, snapping in half as it clanged to the ground. For a moment, the world went dark. Everything ached. Everything hurt. Ah, I'm going to die. He thought at that moment. He had almost given up hope. But then, he heard them. Crying. Screaming. Calling his name. Helios. His eyes opened. Through the pain, through the fog of near death, he saw the monster stalking forward again. It reached for another boulder. Soldiers scrambled to stop it, but none could get close. The beast surged behind it, relentless. His people were dying, and no one else could stop it. Harris pushed himself to his feet. His armor hung in pieces. His ribs screamed with each breath. But he rose, fists clenched, eyes burning with fire not even the gods could quench. Stand up, he whispered. I must not fall, not until they are safe. At that moment, he felt a fire burning from his body, seemingly giving him strength. He sprinted toward the Gijnees, ignoring the calls to stop and the pleas to retreat. His weapon was gone, his body broken, but he had something stronger than steel. He had will. The Gijnees saw him. With a roar, it tossed aside another stone and raised 2 massive fists. The other arms flexed in anticipation. Helios leapt. And they met. Flesh against flesh. Bone against bone. The Titan swung. Helios ducked under its strike and slammed his fist into its kneecap. A small crack formed. It bellowed and grabbed for him. He twisted, elbowing with one arm and kicking with another. His fists were nothing compared to its bulk, but they hurt. Again and again, he struck. Nose. Jaw. Eye. Ribs. His hands bled, but he did not stop. The giant reeled. Then, finally, Helios leapt, aiming one final blow. With every ounce of strength, with the fury of 1,000 fallen comrades, he drove his fist square into the Gijnee's jaw. The air exploded with the sound. The giant's head snapped back. A roar caught in its throat. Its legs buckled, and the Titan fell like a crumbling tower, shaking the battlefield as it slammed into the earth. Silence followed. The monsters paused. They stared at the fallen giant, their warbringer, their juggernaut, their symbol of terror, defeated. And they broke. The horde turned. Some ran. Some flew. Some vanished back into shadow. The courage in their monstrous hearts failed them. They scattered. Helios dropped to one knee, gasping for air. His body felt like a shattered statue. His fists were raw. But he smiled. They were alive. His people were safe. The battlefield, once a storm of death, now stood still. The towering corpse of the Gijnees lay motionless as the sun slowly pierced the clouds above. The silence that ensued was deafening. But a single cry broke the silence and a thunderous cheer soon followed. Helios. Giant Slayer. Hail Helios. And from the highest tower of the city, the flag of Man fluttered proudly in the wind, torn, bloodied, but still standing. Just like the one who led them. Underworld. Hades stood in front of a projection that shimmered like a veil of moonlight. The scene it displayed was not of his realm, but of the overworld above, a city standing triumphant after an unimaginable war. The city of Helios. A mortal bastion built from sweat, pain, unity, and blood. Walls crafted by hand, fields plowed by faith, and streets filled with men and women who had fought off a siege of monsters. And at their helm, the one named Helios, the leader, the giant slayer, the one who turned the tide with nothing but a clenched fist and an indomitable will. Hades frowned. The quiet hum of the projection filled the room like a whisper of the living world. With his hands clasped behind his back, the Lord of the Dead watched, unmoving. Yet his eyes were ablaze with storm and thought. "This will change everything," he muttered. He was happy that they survived, but the implications of this victory were. "Are you not happy?" Hecate, who stood beside him, couldn't help but ask as she saw him frown. Hades gave no reply. Instead, he studied the mortals again. Helios stood tall amid the cheering throng. He looked ragged but undefeated. A symbol. A beacon. "I am." Hades finally said, "They have proven their worth." They were no longer the weak barbarians who knew nothing but a strong and resourceful race who could stand on this world. Hecate tilted her head. "And that troubles you?" "Quite." The Underworld Lord turned, his cloak of shadows trailing behind him like a tide. He stepped down from the platform and past the divine pillars lining the chamber. The flames in their braziers flickered with every brush of his aura. "In the overworld," Hades said, "the Olympians will see this as an opportunity. They will descend upon humanity like lions upon a calf. They will offer protection, gifts, promises, all in exchange for their worship." "Faith," Hecate whispered. Hades nodded. "The faith of the nymphs and lesser spirits is already fading. They no longer respect nor revere the gods as much as they used to. But humans are a boundless wellspring. Their emotions are raw. Their dreams potent. If a god claims them, it would elevate that god beyond their current level." He turned toward her, his face grave. "They will fight over humanity. Use them. Bleed them. Twist them." "Don't tell me you want to stop this?" Hecate asked, her brows arching slightly. "You who swore, long ago, never to interfere in the realm above." Silence fell between them. The air grew heavy with ancient oaths and distant echoes. They both remembered it clearly, how, after the war against the Titans, Hades had made a solemn vow. He would rule the underworld and only the underworld. Let the other gods bicker and scheme in the sky and on earth. He had found peace among the dead. "I did swear," Hades said. "But Styx's oath, powerful though it is, cannot bind me fully. I am far too powerful." "Indeed," Hecate said, stepping forward. "But it is enough to ensure you cannot remain there for long without consequences." "I won't be long," Hades said. "I won't come there to declare war, but just give them a message." "A message?" "To the gods. That humanity is not to be touched. Not by them. Not by Olympus. That if they exploit what mortals have built for themselves, they will have to face me. You know Zeus will not take this lightly." "Let him rage in his sky," Hades said plainly, clearly not taking his brother seriously. He approached the obsidian gate at the far end of the chamber. With a wave of his hand, it opened, revealing a vast bridge that overlooked the river Acheron. Far in the distance, the exit to the overworld shimmered like a mirror surface, untouched by time. Hecate followed behind him. "You'll be weakened," she warned. "With the oath, the further you go into the sky, the more your authority will weaken. Not to mention Zeus's domain resists all underworld essence. He crafted it that way." "I do not need my full strength," Hades replied. "A shadow is enough." Indeed. In overworld, there has yet to be an Olympian to be born that needed him to take seriously. Even Zeus is someone he can crush easily if he so wishes. She stopped walking. "Seriously. You go so far for them." "I have watched humans fight with more dignity than the gods ever showed," Hades said quietly. "I have seen in them something I never saw in Olympus: honor. I like them, no matter how flawed they are. He paused at the edge of the bridge. His cloak fluttered as he turned to her once more. Hecate, you are my most trusted ally. Watch over the realm while I'm gone. If the gods make a move on me or on the humans, respond in kind. Hecate, for the first time in many centuries, hesitated. Then, she slowly bowed. As you command, my king. Hades turned. With a final step, he vanished into the light of the overworld gate, leaving only the echo of his words and the faint chill of his presence. And far above, in the realm of mortals where a young man named Helios stood at the head of his people, shadows lengthened beneath the sun. Because death itself was coming. Not to take, but to protect. The city was alive with the thunder of joy. Men, women, and children flooded the streets, cheering and laughing. The once blood-stained walls of the city of Helios now bore the marks of triumph. Torches lit up the dusk, and the aroma of roasted meat and baked bread filled the air. Everywhere, songs rose to the heavens, raw and imperfect but full of spirit. Helios, still wearing the tattered remains of his battle armor, stood at the highest rampart. His face was tired and bruised, and his arms were bandaged where monstrous claws had torn at him. Yet his eyes were bright, filled with the fierce pride of a leader who had defied death itself and emerged victorious. The people shouted his name, Helios. 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 He raised his hand, and the crowd roared even louder. He was glad everyone was okay. Smiling, Helios observed his people. He wondered if gods had witnessed their stand. If so, would they be rewarded for their bravery? At that moment, the sky, which had been painted with the crimson hues of sunset, began to darken unnaturally. A low rumble, like the rolling of distant thunder, echoed across the land. The torches flickered, some even extinguishing under a sudden gust of wind. A hush fell. The laughter died. The song silenced. Even the crackling of fires seemed muted as the very world seemed to hold its breath. And then, under everyone's eyes, he appeared. From the swirling shadows between heaven and earth, a figure materialized, stepping lightly onto the air itself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his hair white as the moon, his robes woven from the very threads of darkness. Around him danced a faint corona of ghostly light, as if even death itself could not bear to cling to him too closely. And though none among the humans had seen him before, they knew immediately. He was a god. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Their instincts screamed it, as primal and undeniable as the pull of gravity. The god smiled, a gentle, regal smile that bore no malice. And then he spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly across the stunned gathering. Greetings, humanity. I am Hades, he said, king of the underworld. Judge of the souls. God of the dead. Humanity remained silent, not daring to utter a word nor move an inch. At this time, Helios took a step forward. Mighty God of the dead, have you come to end us? Please, take me alone. My people are innocents. He thought the gods would want to punish humanity for killing a son of Gaia. However, contrary to his beliefs, Hades just spread his arms. I stand not as your captor nor your adversary, but as your witness and your rewarder. He smiled, seemingly impressed. Humans of the new dawn. Brave children of earth and sky. I have witnessed your valor, your resilience, your defiance against despair. His voice was deep, layered with an ancient power that resonated in their very bones. You have fought where others would have fled. You have built when others would have surrendered. You have proven yourselves worthy of a future crafted by your own hands. He stepped forward, closer to the battlements where Helios stood frozen, awe in his heart. The humans, still overwhelmed, began slowly kneeling, heads bowed in reverence, though Hades had not commanded it. Hades smiled warmly at them and looked toward Helios. You, he said, voice soft but carrying to every ear. The one who bore the weight of your people, who faced monsters and giants with nothing but will and broken steel. You, Helios, have carved your name into the very marrow of this world. He lifted a hand. A soft golden light, so unlike his usual dark power, blossomed from his palm and swept across the people like a gentle wave. Wounds healed. Bruised spirits mended. The weariness that had seeped into their bones melted away, replaced by warmth, vitality, and hope. The children who had cried now laughed with pure, unbroken joy. The warriors who had limped stood tall once more. It was a miracle that even the simplest heart could understand. "You have my blessing," Hades said, and the ground itself seemed to hum in agreement. The god then turned to all the gathered humans, his eyes gleaming with a fire of command. "Hear now the words of Hades, which shall be etched into the fate of the world." The air itself thickened, charged with the weight of prophecy. From this day forth, humanity shall stand independent, neither the playthings nor the thralls of gods, titans, nor spirits. No race shall lay claim to your destiny but yourselves. The humans gasped, and even Helios felt tears prick at the corners of his tired eyes. Freedom had been given voice. They no longer need to endure the trials and punishments of gods, which seemed to aim to annihilate their race. And further, Hades continued, "This city, the beating heart of your courage, shall no longer be called merely a city." He pointed his fingers toward the walls of Helios. The earth quaked gently. The stones shimmered. The towers seemed to rise a little higher, the streets straighter, and the land itself accepting his decree. "I named this place Helio, the first kingdom of mortals since the dawn of creation." A stunned silence, and then cries of astonishment and joy broke out among the people. Hades turned his gaze again to Helios, who knelt humbly but proudly. "You, Helios, for your valor, wisdom, and sacrifice, shall be named the first king of humanity." A golden laurel, woven from the very essence of mortal dreams, materialized in Hades' hand. He gently placed it upon Helios' bowed head. "Arise," Hades said, "as King Helios, Lord of humanity." Helios rose, his heart pounding with 1,000 emotions: gratitude, pride, humility, and a searing sense of responsibility. Hades stepped back, his voice thundering once more, "And one final decree shall I make this day. From this moment forth, when mortals speak of those who stand above fear and despair, those who challenge fate and conquer it, they shall call them hero." He smiled. "In honor of Helios, the first of your kings." The crowd erupted, tears streaming from their faces, shouting Helios' name and the word that would henceforth inspire countless generations. "Hero! Hero! Hero!" The very heavens seemed to ring with their voices. For a long moment, Hades watched them, a rare glimmer of satisfaction in his dark eyes. He had given them a future, not bound by the chains of heaven nor the will of death, but crafted by their own courage and strength. As the cheers echoed into the distance, Hades turned. His form blurred into mist, vanishing into the twilight sky, leaving behind a mortal world forever changed. Thus, in the age before records, before written words, the first kingdom of Mun was born. And so too was born the eternal legend of the hero. The sky split open like a wound. Upon the vast, empty expanse of the heavens, where no mortal eye could see, a ripple of raw power spread, distorting the clouds and forcing the very air to tremble. There, standing alone upon the wind, was Hades, lord of the underworld, his dark cloak billowing as though it were made from the night itself. His brow was slightly raised, his expression calm yet edged with mild irritation, as he regarded the scene before him. For surrounding him, forming a loose circle upon the air, were the Olympians, brilliant, radiant gods who ruled the overworld. They stood proud and furious. Their armor gleamed like molten gold, and their divine weapons crackled with the power of storms and seas. Their eyes, once filled with the lazy arrogance of those unchallenged, now burned with anger. At their head floated Zeus, king of Olympus, his thunderbolt gripped tightly in one hand, his knuckles white with rage. "Hades!" Zeus bellowed, his voice shaking the very sky. Lightning licked the clouds above him, snarling like a chained beast. "Explain yourself." Hades remained silent, studying his younger brother with a dispassionate gaze. "You were bound." Zeus shouted again, stepping forward, the Olympians following behind him. "By your own oath, by Styx herself, you swore never to interfere in the affairs of the overworld. Never set yourself above us." Hades tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I have not broken my oath," Hades said, voice calm but carrying like a blade drawn across stone. "I did not seize dominion. I did not raise armies nor topple thrones. I merely—" He paused, letting the silence grow heavy, rewarded the valor of mortals. The gods bristled. Poseidon's trident quivered with suppressed fury. Ares's eyes narrowed into slits. Athena gripped her spear tighter. Zeus' face twisted in rage. Merely. Zeus snarled. You healed them. You blessed them. You anointed a king in your name. He threw his arm toward the world below. You gave them strength enough to resist us. Your blessings have tainted the main source of faith. Taking faith from humanity will be troublesome now. Hades' smile faded into cold neutrality. Zeus' voice grew more savage, cursing in ancient tongues not heard since the birth of the world. You rotten, corpse-loving wretch. You worm from beneath the soil. You dare twist the course of fate set by Olympus itself. The other gods laughed cruelly at Zeus' insults, rallying behind their king. But Hades simply sighed. The sky grew heavier. The laughter of the gods choked in their throats as a presence, vast, ancient, and terrible, began to rise from Hades. It was as if an abyss had opened, and from it came not just the scent of death but the very concept of mortality itself, the inevitable end that even gods, in their deepest hearts, feared. In an instant, the boundless, crushing weight of the underworld itself pressed down upon the Olympians. The clouds blackened. The light dimmed. The wind died. Zeus gasped, staggering as an invisible force slammed into him, forcing him to his knees. His thunderbolt fell from his hand, crackling uselessly as it tumbled through the air. The Olympians cried out, some falling to one knee, others clutching their throats as if the very air had turned to stone. Hades floated forward, unhurried, his black eyes gleaming with a cold fire. You have grown comfortable in your thrones, Hades said quietly, each word reverberating like a hammer in the gods' minds. You have grown fat with worship, drunk on power you did not earn. He approached Zeus, who struggled against the crushing gravity but found himself powerless. You forget, little brother, Hades said, his voice low and terrible, why the Titans fell. He reached out, and with terrifying gentleness, pressed his palm down on Zeus' golden crown. Zeus screamed in rage and shame as his body buckled, forced slowly, inexorably, onto both knees. The king of the gods, the wielder of the sky, the slayer of Cronus, knelt. His head bowed low, pressed toward the unseen ground, as Hades' hand remained firm atop his scalp. The Olympians could only watch in stunned horror. None dared to move. None could break free from the oppressive might that suffused the heavens. Hades leaned down, his voice dropping into a whisper that somehow echoed like 1,000 storms. I am not your subject, Zeus. I am not your lesser. And I do not require your permission. He withdrew his hand, and Zeus collapsed forward, gasping. Slowly, with a regal grace, Hades straightened and cast his gaze over the gathered gods, searing each of them with his black stare. Know this, he said, voice now loud enough to shake the horizon, humanity is under my protection. If any of you dare to enslave them, corrupt them, or leech their faith without their willing gift, you will answer to me. The sky split again, a silent promise of devastation should they defy him. Hades turned his back on Zeus without fear, stepping away as the clouds began to part slightly above him. You have been warned, he said simply. And with a ripple of shadow, Hades vanished, leaving the Olympians trembling and silent amid the wreckage of their pride. Far below, in the newborn kingdom of Harion, humanity celebrated, ignorant of the divine battle waged high above their heads, a battle that would shape the fate of gods and men for ages to come. The halls of Olympus trembled with rage. Thunder cracked across the heavens, shattering the stillness, as Zeus stormed through the marble corridors of his palace. His footsteps echoed like the marching of 1,000 soldiers, his fists clenched so tightly that the veins on his arms bulged like serpents writhing beneath his skin. Damn him! Zeus roared, sending a nearby pillar splintering into dust with a single strike of his hand. Damn Hades! That corpse-loving worm! His divine aura flared wildly, the very air sizzling with bolts of lightning, causing lesser gods and spirits to flee his presence in terror. He has been greatly humiliated, having his head pressed down to the ground and not even being able to raise his head. As the king of gods, how dare a mere worm who only hides under his sky make him lower his head? That too, in front of his council. Seated around the grand hall, the other Olympians watched in silence, the taste of humiliation still fresh on their tongues. None dared to speak just yet. At the side of the hall, Ares, god of war, sat stiffly on his throne of bronze. His fingers gripped the edges so tightly that the metal groaned under the pressure. His crimson cloak was crumpled slightly, a rare blemish for the god of battle, but Ares hardly noticed. He was too busy feeling the lingering weight of Hades' oppressive power, still coiled deep inside his chest like a venom that refused to fade. He had faced many gods. He had marched at the front lines of countless wars. Yet never, never, had he felt so small, so hopeless as he did in the presence of Hades that day. Like an ant trying to shoulder the sky, he felt so small and helpless. The power and strength he was so proud was so insignificant in front of that monster. The tales of him defeating and killing the primordial of sky, even being acknowledged by the primordial himself to be worthy to stand beyond heavens, were certainly not an exaggeration. He thought that even if Hades was stronger than his father, he shouldn't be that strong. Oh, how wrong he was. Ares gritted his teeth, a drop of sweat trailing down his temple, a testament to his silent, festering shame. Across the hall, Poseidon, ruler of the seas, sat heavily upon his throne crafted from shells and coral. His normally wild green eyes were dimmed, the trident leaning and used at his side. He said nothing. Outwardly, Poseidon remained composed, the sea god's pride would allow no less, but internally, he seethed with frustration. He had not forgotten how, ages ago, he and Zeus had cast lots to divide the world, with Hades not participating and opting to take the Underworld. Though they didn't show it, they had laughed at him then, pleased to leave their grim elder brother to the land of the dead. But now, Poseidon's jaw tightened. He thought, with him taking over the sea, he would have bridged the gap between him and Hades, but that was far from the truth. In fact, he even felt that Hades had grown far stronger than before. No longer just a king of ghosts and silent tombs, but a sovereign whose mere presence could bend even mighty Zeus to his knees. A low rumble vibrated from Poseidon's throat, like a distant storm gathering over the ocean. And then, there was Athena. The goddess of wisdom and war sat gracefully upon her throne of polished olive wood, her silver armor gleaming faintly under the stormlit ceiling. Her long hair flowed down her back like a dark river, untouched by the chaos around her. Her purple eyes, deep, piercing, unblinking, were not filled with rage or fear, but with thought. While the others wallowed in their wounded pride, Athena's mind was racing. She recalled the figure of Hades, standing alone against the assembly, calm as a mountain while all others shook. The way he spoke, the effortless dominance he exerted, no wild outbursts, no desperation, only pure, unassailable authority. Athena's slender fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of her throne. That display of confidence and strength was intoxicating. And as someone who's interested in knowledge more than anything else, she knew a lot more than the current generation of gods about the titanomachy of the past. She even learned from her own mother, Métis, that Hades was also the main strategist of the rebel forces that are now the Olympians. In guerrilla warfare and scorched earth tactics, Hades came up and invented various strategies that made up for the rebels' lack of manpower, allowing them to overwhelm the Titans. Athena closed her eyes briefly. Unlike others, she was far more interested in Hades. One can even say she admires him. That was why she uses a spear as her main weapon. Not to mention the library in the Underworld, said to contain all knowledge of the past and present. She wanted to visit the place, but going there is incredibly hard, and leaving is almost impossible. No overworld gods managed to enter the Underworld and return. Rumor has it that all trespassers were immediately sent to Tartarus. That was why she held off heading there, despite her curiosity. She opened her eyes again, cool and calculating. Across the hall, Zeus had finally ceased his rampage, panting heavily, his golden beard matted with sweat. He whirled on the gathered gods, his voice hoarse but fierce. We cannot let this stand. We are the Olympians, the rulers of the heavens, the earth, and the seas. We will not be outshone by a specter from the shadows. No one answered. Not immediately. Poseidon eventually stirred, his voice low and heavy. And what do you propose, brother? He rumbled. Another war? A strike against Hades. The silence that followed was long and tense. Even Zeus, reckless though he was, felt the weight of that suggestion. A war against Hades, it would not be like the war against the Titans. It would not be a simple battle. It would be annihilation, for one side or the other. And deep down, in the pit of his soul, Zeus feared who would prevail. No, Zeus muttered at last, spitting the word like poison. Not yet. He straightened, his aura of command slowly stitching itself back together. We will bide our time, Zeus growled. We will undermine his influence. Humanity is still young. They are still mortal. Their memories are short, their loyalties weaker than the river's flow. He clenched his fist. We will infiltrate them. Corrupt them. Seduce them. Ares finally stirred, his voice like a rasped growl. And if they resist? Zeus smiled grimly. Then, he said, his voice cold, we remind them why the gods are to be feared. He cannot stand this humiliation. Thankfully, not all of the Olympians saw that. If Hades wanted to protect humanity, then he would corrupt them and make them believe in the Olympians. Due to the excessive behaviors of the gods, rape, coercion, and depravity, many mortal races, such as nymphs, began to lose faith in them, weakening their divinity. After all, those mortals are powerful on their own and don't need gods to protect them. But humans are different. They are weak, fragile, stupid, and prone to irrational behaviors. They can be easily influenced. Give them a little bit of miracle and they can be a great supply of faith for the gods. That's why Zeus will absolutely not give them up, even if it means going against Hades. He will have them under his control. The sky above had long since darkened, but it bore no stars, only a heavy, suffocating void. There, at the edge of the overworld where light bowed to shadow, stood Hades. His cloak fluttered even with the absence of wind as he stared into the vast, yawning hallway carved into the fabric of the world itself. This was no ordinary tunnel. It was the entrance to the Underworld, a corridor of infinite dusk that devoured all noise and warmth and pulsed with a heartbeat of death itself. Hades took a step forward. The world behind him, of gods bickering, of humans beginning to write their legend, faded with each footfall. Stone beneath his feet no longer felt like earth but something older, darker, forged in the chaos of the first dawn. With every step deeper, he could feel the invisible shackles that once bound him in the overworld slowly dissolve. His authority, once veiled under his oath, the constraints of Olympus law and Zeus' false supremacy, returned like the tide. His steps grew firmer. The weight of his power began to settle over him like a mantle reforged. Yet even as the full force of his godhood bled back into his being, his thoughts remained distracted. What now? He muttered to himself, voice a low echo that vanished into the corridor's gullet. Humanity had proven itself in fire and blood. Helios, that mortal whose name would echo into eternity, had succeeded in forging the first kingdom by mortal hands. The foundations of a future Hades had long foreseen were now set. The world would change. The gods would react. Some with awe, others with fear. The Underworld, too, ran smoothly, almost too smoothly. The operation he had built, the 3 sectors ruled by his 12 patrons, operated in balance even with the burdens of growing mortal death rates and the chaos of monster plagues above. And yet, they were woefully understaffed. Too few divine spirits, too few gods willing to accept the responsibilities of death's domain. But even this was not what truly haunted him. Should he train? He had long since stopped training to get stronger decades ago, only maintaining a routine to keep himself from getting rusty. It wasn't because he was lazy or he was busy, but simply because his strength capped and can no longer improve. He had tried countless ways to break that limit, but it seems like this fabric of reality itself was rejecting any being that could surpass the power of a primordial. It seems the primordial gods are the limit of power that this universe can bear, or something. He stopped, breath forming a frostless sigh as he remembered another matter. The corridor ahead shimmered with the familiar obsidian mist of home, but his mind wandered elsewhere, to her. Gaia. Her voice still echoed in his thoughts, like roots threading into the deepest caverns of his mind. She had come to him not long ago, draped in the majesty of mountain and time. She had made her request clear, to sire a child, an offspring born not just of raw power, but of divine purpose. A being meant to restore balance, to punish Olympus, to stand where others would falter. He had not answered her then. He could not. Even now, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of consequence. Gaia and Uranus made it simply to produce an offspring, so their power was merely a fragment of the 2 primordials. But this time, Gaia was specifically asking him for a child that could punish the gods and naturally would give them a large amount of power. A being born from 2 primordial class beings would surely be a terrifying creature. However, at the same time, he was curious. Would their child break the limit and surpass the primordials? He wanted to see, but at the same time he was worried about the consequences. How much destruction would that kid cause if it were to be born? The corridor finally ended. Before him was the shore of the river Styx. The air shimmered, alive with a hum of spiritual activity. Souls lined up in winding queues, their ethereal eyes dull and lost. The ferryman, Sharon, turned his hooded head and bowed wordlessly. Nearby, Styx herself emerged from the fog like a blade of judgment, her stern eyes immediately softening as she recognized him. "You have returned, my king," Styx said, her voice a ripple in the river's current. "I have," Hades replied, still distant in tone. "Is all well?" There was a surge of souls after the last battle above. "Helios' war left many dead," she replied. "But we've managed. Hypnos has reinforced the river gates. Hera returned from her overwatch and awaits your counsel." Hades nodded absently, his eyes drifting past Styx to the far-off towers of Nox City rising from the shadows. "Very well. I'll see to them later." Styx narrowed her eyes. "You seem burdened." "I'm simply thinking." "Of Gaia's proposal?" He finally turned to her, giving a small, almost doubtful look. "How did you know that?" "I know everything. I love gossip." The Lord of the Underworld chuckled. "Yeah, that's creepy." Styx tilted her head. "That's rich coming from a guy peeping on a human man and his entire race." "Touché." Hades chuckled. However, his eyes soon stared at a distance. "What do you think of Gaia's proposal?" "If I may," she said, politely, "I believe accepting her offer is a great choice. With this, we can curb those gods' arrogance and purify the den of filth that is Olympus. But I believe you're quite soft to do that. After all, they are not an enemy." Hades didn't respond for a long moment. He looked out across the river, its waters dark and endless. "Perhaps," he admitted. "But perhaps that is the very thing the world needs now." Even he cannot stomach how low Olympus has fallen into depravity. Perhaps they might change if they were punished. He turned, walking past Styx. This time she did not follow. Behind him, the ferryboats rocked in their eternal rhythm, and the souls murmured like a restless tide. His palace loomed in the distance, its towers glowing faintly under the lightless sky. As he entered the dark halls of the underworld once more, Hades whispered to himself, "If the gods above lose their way, perhaps it's time to birth something new below." And with that thought, the king of the dead walked forward, not just into the heart of his domain, but into a choice that would change the fate of the cosmos. Underworld. Core Section, Trial Hall. The halls were dim but alive with murmurs, disputes, and the constant footsteps of denizens and divine spirits moving to fulfill their duties. Among them stood Hera, a high-ranking patron of the underworld and self-proclaimed queen of the underworld. Her silken robes, once pristine and adorned with gold, were now slightly creased, stained faintly with the ink of scrolls and parchment from days of endless bureaucracy. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid, practicality replacing vanity. Her gaze, however, remained as sharp and imperious as ever. She sat on a throne not meant for her, but one she now occupied by necessity, an obsidian chair placed before the judgment dais of the underworld, where conflicts and bureaucratic errors were settled daily. Before her stood three lesser gods. Two were engaged in a fierce dispute, their divine voices cracking like thunder. The third, a junior mediator, had summoned Hera for help after being overwhelmed. "He invaded my domain. Those souls were meant for my domain," shouted the first lesser god, his eyes flickering with ember-like rage. His essence reeked of pride and overworked frustration. "You abandoned them," the second god roared in reply, arms crossed. "They were wandering aimlessly. I guided them when you failed." For underworld gods, the spirit energy released by souls was like the faith of mortals is to overworld gods. It supplies them with divinity, strengthens them, and essentially turns them into immortals, as long as souls exist in their domains. That's why many gods would fight over souls and have them as denizens of their own territory. Hera leaned her cheek into her hand and tapped the armrest with her fingers, her expression flat. She had heard variations of this same dispute 5 times today. "Enough," Hera finally said, her voice cutting clean through the rising fury. Both gods silenced immediately. Even lesser divinities knew not to tempt the wrath of Hera when she was in no mood for dramatics. She gestured toward the second god. "You're guilty." His mouth fell open, stunned. "But you did not file a soul transfer request. You cannot redirect souls under another god's jurisdiction without permission, no matter how negligent they are. She turned to the first god. And as for you, your laziness has been noted. Consider this a warning. Then she looked back at the guilty one. As punishment, you will work double shifts at the soul sorting lines along with Sharon. A full year. Report to the River Styx's office immediately. The second god groaned but dared not protest further. The sentence wasn't cruel, just exhausting. In the underworld, where time crawled and every soul mattered, punishment was meted not by pain, but by labor. There were no prisons, only tasks. After all, gods in prison means less manpower. And there are many cases where a god would commit a crime and get themselves imprisoned just to escape work. So Hades changed the punishment and had all those who break the law work even more. As the gods left, grumbling and defeated, Hera let out a long sigh. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was the absence of 1,000 other problems briefly held at bay. She slumped into the throne and rubbed her temples. 6 disputes since morning. 3 denizens tried to file for reincarnation without proper clearance. And a minor spirit accidentally crossed into the outer section without permission and almost drowned in Phlegethon. Wonderful. A voice slithered from beside her like a teasing gust of wind. My, how far the great Hera has fallen. Judging petty squabbles among overworked lackeys? How regal. Hera didn't even look to see the source. Camp. The beautiful half-dragon, half-woman mount of Hades smiled like a serpent preparing to strike. Her shimmering scales glinted faintly in the torchlight. I brought tea. But I drank it all while watching you suffer. Hera let out another sigh, deeper this time. You're a real delight. Ever since our dear Lord Hades decided to tour the realms like some wandering philosopher, you become the new monarch of misery, Camp said with a chuckle. Aren't you honored? You're practically the queen of the underworld now. Also, Hades went to the overworld, but that was known only to Hades, Hecate, Styx, and Sharon, so to Camp and others' knowledge, Hades was still wandering the underworld. Honored? Maybe. But I haven't had proper tea and rest time in 6 days, Hera replied flatly. Do you know what that does to someone like me? 6 days of parchment. 6 days of judgment and endless disputes over soul rights, faith tax adjustments, and territorial squabbles. Camp snorted. Welcome to management. I rather like watching you toil. I usually only see this level of suffering in Tartarus. Hera was about to respond, or perhaps groan again, when Camp's tone suddenly shifted, lighter, almost playful. Oh, by the way, Lord Hades has returned. Hera blinked. She sat up straight so fast the chair creaked. What? She said sharply. He arrived at his fortress not long ago. That mud is still bowing, I think. Powers surging back through the palace. Camp's grin widened. So, yeah, pretty sure Daddy's home. Hera stood without a word. Camp watched her go, amused as always, but Hera didn't even turn back. The moment she stepped out of the chamber, her divine form surged with renewed energy. Exhaustion was forgotten. Work, delays, complaints, all irrelevant now. With swift strides, she moved past the columns of judgment, down the marble steps, through courtyards where spirits whispered and bowed, and ascended the ethereal staircase that led to the hanging fortress, the palace of the underworld that floated in the shadows above all else. The guards, upon seeing her, immediately opened the black iron gates. She didn't slow her pace. She could feel it. The power inside. It wasn't just that Hades had returned. It was that the underworld had awakened. The fortress itself, dormant in his absence, now pulsed with energy. Columns glowed softly, and the shadows danced as if in celebration. The throne hall doors were ajar, and golden light, subtle, strange, shone through. She stepped inside. And there he was. Hades, Lord of the Underworld, sat on his throne, not as a shadowy, grim figure, but as a king who had made a choice. His gaze was distant and thoughtful, but when he saw her, it softened just slightly. You've returned, she said, breathless. I have, he replied. There was a pause, short, yet meaningful. Then Hera crossed the chamber and stood beside his throne. She didn't kneel, she was not one to kneel for anyone, but she placed her hand on the edge of the obsidian seat and met his eyes. Don't ever vanish like that. Do you know what I've been through while you're gone? Work, work, and even more work. Hades gave the faintest smile. Sorry, but I just needed to see just how the realm is under my rule. And now that you have, she asked. He looked past her, toward the vast window overlooking the river Lethe. Now, I think it's time we shape what comes next. Hera's tiredness, her frustrations, all of it seemed to dissipate. Because now, with Hades back, the real work could begin. Years passed since the Battle of Harion, that fateful day when a mortal with nothing but his willpower and bruised fists had felled a giant. The world remembered that day as the turning point of humanity, a dawn not heralded by gods, but by Mun. At the heart of it all stood Helios, the first king, whose name had become a banner, a title, and a legend. From a city born in fire and blood, Harion had grown into a sprawling kingdom. Where once crude shelters had stood, now rose walls of sturdy stone and brick. Farms stretched beyond the horizon, rivers were tamed with aqueducts, and roads linked distant lands. The new banner of Helios, a silver fist against a crimson sun, flew from every tower and fortress under his rule. Tribes that once fought over scraps and territory were united under his vision. Helios did not conquer merely with blades. He came with words, with order, with justice. He offered law and purpose to the wandering and the war-torn. Resistance was often met, but it was brief. Helios' strength on the battlefield was legendary, and even greater was his charisma. He became not just a king but the very embodiment of human aspiration. In the center of Harion's capital now stood the sanctum of Hades, a grand temple, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Carved from obsidian and adorned with silver veins, it loomed tall into the sky, a monument of gratitude and devotion. Twin statues of Hades stood at the gates, one bearing a spear wrapped in shades, the other holding a crown, symbolizing both his divine weapons. Beneath the temple was a great flame, the eternal lantern, lit with black fire that never extinguished. It was said Hades himself had kindled it during his descent, and that the flame would burn as long as humanity honored his name. But Hades was not the only one worshipped. Humanity built temples for many underworld gods. Hecate, the goddess of magic. Hera, the goddess of marriage. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is one of the three goddesses that are most worshipped by the humans. Due to their association with the underworld, the humans honored love and marriage more than the original myths. With the goddess of marriage being an underworld goddess, humans believe that marriage will last until death, so divorce was considered a sin. Love became so sacred that they believed that those who are unfaithful will suffer an eternity in Tartarus. The people did not pray to these gods in fear but in reverence. They were seen as protectors, not tyrants. For it was the underworld that had recognized humanity's strength first. The gods above had watched. The gods below had acted. This faith bore fruit. Under the blessings of the underworld, crops flourished even in poor soil, and winters were mild. The souls of the dead were properly buried and guided. Disease was rare. Every child knew the name Helios, and every adult aspired to become a hero, a title now given to those who served the kingdom with valor, courage, and virtue. Helios, now older and clad in armor adorned with laurels of black iron and crimson silk, would often walk among his people. He no longer fought in battles himself. His presence alone was enough to rally or tame. His council was composed of former warriors, scholars, and seers, many of whom had once been his rivals and now served loyally. The kingdom of Harion extended from the great rivers of the east to the stone cliffs of the western sea. Tribes had been turned into cities. Oral traditions became scrolls. And across the realm, festivals were held every year to honor the night god, as Hades came to be known by the common folk. One such festival, called the Black Dawn, began with silence. People gathered at night, wearing black robes, lighting lanterns to walk through the streets in complete stillness. At sunrise, drums roared, horns blew, and feasts were held. Children were told the tale of how a Mun once punched a giant into the earth, and how the Lord of the Dead smiled upon that act of defiance. In time, other races, nymphs, satyrs, and dryads, watched from afar, uneasy and awed. For the first time, they felt themselves replaced in divine favor. The gods of Olympus watched too, and with every passing year, their temples grew quieter, their influence fading among men. But humanity did not care. They had a king who had bled for them, a god who had blessed them, and a future they would forge with their own hands. The kingdom of Harion was no longer a single city or a desperate stand against monsters. It was now the beating heart of mankind. Mount Olympus. The marble halls of Olympus shimmered under the golden light of the sun, yet a palpable tension hung in the air. The gods had convened, summoned by Zeus to address a matter that had been festering in the divine realm: the unprecedented rise of human devotion to Hades and the mortal king, Helios. Zeus, seated upon his grand throne, his brow furrowed, addressed the assembly. That damn Hades acted all just and honorable, warning us to leave humanity alone. But he took action and gathered humanity's faith behind our backs. How deceitful. He's a hypocrite. Ares, ever the embodiment of war, slammed his fist upon the table. This is an affront. Mortals, our creations, now turn to the Lord of the Dead? We must remind them of our might. Of course, the fact that it was Prometheus who created humanity, or how they tried to punish humans for bearing the flame that Prometheus gave by sending hordes of monsters, was left unsaid, or rather, they completely forgot that. In their minds, humanity was their creation and therefore must worship them. Poseidon, god of the seas, nodded in agreement. Now, the faiths of those other mortal races have begun to wane. We need the new race, humanity, to provide us with a new source of faith. Hades deprived us of our right for that. And the wars. Ares slammed his fist on the table. Those damn humans all dedicated their war campaigns to Hades, forgetting completely that I am the god of war. I say we ignore Hades and eliminate humanity. Zeus thundered. Then, we will create another race to worship us. I agree. Ares grinned. Amidst the clamor, Hermes, the messenger god, raised his hand, signaling for silence. Perhaps we approach this wrongly. Instead of confronting Helios and his followers directly, why not support the human tribes that resist his rule? Empower them to establish their own kingdoms, loyal to us. Zeus' eyebrows rose as he leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. Hermes continued, by backing these tribes, we create a counterbalance. Their successes will inspire others, and our influence will be restored through their victories. The gods murmured in agreement, the strategy appealing to their desire for reverence without direct confrontation. Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt, sat apart from the discussion, engaged in their own conversation. Athena doesn't really care about faiths. As long as mortals continue to seek knowledge and wisdom, faith will naturally gather to her. Artemis was the same. As long as mortals still hunt for food, then she doesn't even need their worship. That sounds interesting, Zeus smirked. Well then, who agrees to this arrangement? Boring. But I guess I can agree, said Ares. That's a yes for me. Hermes smirked. I don't care, do what you wish. Dionysus hiccuped, his head down on the table, completely drunk. The other gods also expressed their agreement. With the majority in consensus, Zeus declared, let it be so. We shall extend our blessings to those who resist Helios. Through them, our legacy will endure. Their legacy of depravity, that is. But of course, they don't believe that. After all, they are the righteous and just gods in their hearts. The Underworld. On the boundary between Tartarus, far from the bustle of underworld cities and the quiet hum of souls and passage, lay a realm untouched by time, the territory of Nyx, the primordial of night. Here, the stars themselves seemed to float just above one's head, and darkness wasn't simply the absence of light, it was substance, a velvet fabric that weaved around the essence of the place. There were no walls, no boundaries, just an endless cascade of twilight filled with dreams, memories, and things forgotten. It was here that Hades, king of the underworld, sat in absolute stillness, legs crossed upon a floating obsidian platform suspended in the abyss. His body was motionless, but within him, a storm brewed. He had been meditating for months, or perhaps years. Time moved strangely in Nyx's realm. Countless divine senses expanded outward, brushing against the invisible strands of his domains: primordial sky, death, mortality, wealth, spirits, darkness, and as of recently, courage. Each of these flowed into his essence like rivers into a sea. He could feel their weight, their power. He could sense how they responded to his will, faster, sharper, and more refined than ever before. Yet, there was no change. No ascent. No breakthrough. His power had stagnated. He opened his eyes, purple irises glinting with cold silver rings, and exhaled, his breath forming visible ripples in the fabric of the realm. All this time, all this discipline, and yet he remained at the same threshold, incapable of pushing through. "I've mastered my control," he muttered to himself. "But my power can no longer improve. How frustrating." He looked around. There was no sign of Nyx. He had initially come here in secret, hoping that the Mother of Night, the one closest to the source of chaos among the living primordials, might offer guidance, but her throne stood empty. Her scent had long faded from the place, and her whispers no longer echoed in the stars. She hadn't returned in for who knows how long. Was she wandering the cosmos? Or did something else happen to her? The thought stirred discomfort. Even now, Hades did not fully understand Nyx, despite their intimacy. No one did. He stood slowly, the obsidian platform rippling beneath his feet like disturbed water. His tall frame cast northwest shadow in the place of eternal night, his black robes fluttering as if moved by unseen winds. His divine authority swirled around him like a coiled serpent, boundless, refined, but frustratingly capped. He could not grow stronger within the underworld, nor in the overworld, where his presence was suppressed by his oath and Zeus' dominion over the sky. He even thought of going back to chaos just to seek an opportunity to improve, no matter how much he doesn't want to return there. He turned his gaze upward, though there was no sky, only a veil of living darkness. Chaos, he thought, frowning in annoyance. A place not bound by time or space. A realm above reality, where the concept of dimension collapsed under its own contradictions. A metaphysical space existing above infinite dimensions, within infinite universes. There, everything existed simultaneously, past, present, and future, form, formless, and forgotten. It was the source of the primordials, the origin of gods, monsters, and even the canvas upon which fate was written. And it was filled with horrors that defied shape and logic. Hades remembered their eyes, if they could be called that, watching him from every direction and none. Creatures whose laughter sounded like collapsing stars. Giants who wore galaxies like beads. Serpents made of space and time. Silent things that fed on memory and identity. He clenched his fists. He had entered chaos once before, long ago, when he first came to this world, where he was just a young godling hiding from Cronus in that mountain. In that place, he sought understanding, hoping to claim a greater domain, to evolve from God to something higher. But what he found was terror, and the realization that even gods were prey in that place. Still, the temptation now grew stronger. He had done everything in his power to elevate humanity, to organize the underworld, and to maintain cosmic balance. But no matter how wide his influence, how many temples were built in his name, how many souls knelt before him, his strength no longer grew. He touched his chest, feeling the divine spark within him. It beat steadily, a warmth of power eclipsing any gods and divines, but it was not enough. He had glimpsed the limits of divinity, and they were walls of glass. Invisible. Inflexible. To break past those walls, he would need something more. Perhaps a new domain. Perhaps chaos itself. But at what cost? Suddenly, a familiar presence brushed against the edge of the realm. Styx, the river goddess, was scouring the underworld, searching for him. Hades turned his head. He did not answer her call, not immediately. He let her search for a while as he stood there, caught between choices. He could return to his duties and continue ruling the underworld as the wise, noble king. Safe. Contained. Familiar. Or, he could risk everything again, step into that swirling madness and challenge the laws of reality itself. He might return stronger, or not at all. For a moment, he simply breathed, his divine form quiet amidst the stars. Nyx, he whispered to the empty throne. I really need your advice right now. Amongst the primordials, you were the closest to chaos itself. Then, reluctantly, Hades turned and walked toward Styx's presence. His footsteps were slow, each step echoing like thunder through the realm of night. As he passed through the veil of darkness and back toward the structured underworld, he glanced over his shoulder once more. The emptiness behind him remained silent. The cosmos stretched endlessly, its fabric alive with rivers of stardust, churning galaxies, and forgotten eons. Beyond even the furthest starlight, where no mortal mind could comprehend and no divine eye often strayed, there drifted a being older than light itself, Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. Her form was cloaked in shimmering black, her silhouette shaped not by flesh but by absence, an outline filled with a void between stars. She glided through the realms where dimensions began to bleed together, searching, listening, hunting for something not of this world. Something foreign, uncalled for, and completely familiar yet unfamiliar. Something that shouldn't have yet come to this world, something that Kronos allowed to enter earlier than it should have. A fragment of a creature no divine mind could comprehend. It had invaded. Nyx had followed its trail for years in mortal time, combing through plains of law, pits of madness, and cradles of unborn worlds. And yet, it always seemed just ahead, like smoke vanishing into deeper darkness. She halted now upon a collapsing star whose death screamed across timelines. The heat meant nothing to her. She had been exposed to many things hotter than a collapsing star. She extended a hand, and the remnants of starlight quieted, bowing to her presence. She closed her eyes, hoping the silence would speak. It didn't. Instead, another presence emerged, familiar, equally ancient, and just as insufferable. Still searching, came a velvet voice, smooth and arrogant. Nyx's eyes opened lazily. She didn't turn. Still acting sneakily as ever. "Show yourself, you buffoon." From the shadows beside her, stepping out of a seam in space, came a man dressed in layered black robes stitched from void and starlight. His hair was short and swept back with elegance, and his face, handsome, refined, and bearing a touch of eternal smugness, remained untouched by age. Only his eyes betrayed how many eons he had lived. Erebus. Primordial of darkness. Her oldest companion. Her shadow twin. Her son? Brother? Equal? Mistake? She looked at him with narrowed eyes. "You're late. Tell me what you found." "I searched every corner of the outer cosmos," he replied with a light nod. "From the silver forests of Iron Vale to the red scar of the void leviathans. No trace of that mysterious being." Nyx frowned. That was not what she wanted to hear. She was hoping that that thing had at least left some traces, but even Erebus couldn't find anything. "Then try harder," she said coldly. "I am," he answered smoothly, walking beside her to gaze into the imploding star. "But if it can hide from you, it may not even belong to this kind of universe." She said nothing. Erebus knew nothing of chaos or of anything from the outside, but he's terrifyingly sharp. Erebus turned his head, the faintest smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, and your little lover came by your old dwelling." Nyx slowly turned her head, eyes glowing faintly. "I know. Now scram. Don't meddle with my affairs." "Affairs?" he said with mock surprise. "Forgive me. I only thought it amusing how frustrated he was. Poor Hades, so bound by divine limits. Still thirsting for growth, poor thing." "I said, scram," she said again, her tone sharpened. Erebus's smirk widened, but his eyes remained heavy with timeless knowledge. "As you command, mother." The word echoed. It bounced between shattered dimensions and ancient memories. It slammed into Nyx's core. In an instant, she spun toward him, hand outstretched, summoning a spear of dark light, a weapon woven from darkest night and cosmic silence. She hurled it with such force that the star behind them imploded faster, tearing into itself with a howling scream. But Erebus was already gone. His laughter, low and echoing, faded into the distant corners of space. Nyx floated in silence, the darkness around her trembling slightly from her sudden burst of fury. She stared at the empty space where Erebus had stood, teeth clenched. She hated that name. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it was true. She had birthed most of the Underworld's pantheon from her own essence. From despair, from silence, from the stillborn seeds of the cosmos. Thanatos, Hypnos, Moros, the Keris, Eris, Oasis, and yes, even Erebus. But calling her mother felt like chains. She preferred sister. It allowed her to be part of creation without being responsible for it. Without being bound. She floated there, alone, her mind drifting. She knew Hades was searching for her, hoping she might show him how to ascend further, to transcend godhood itself. But she had nothing to give. She too was stuck. She too had reached a ceiling. For all her power, for all her mastery of night, even she had stopped growing. That was the curse of their reality. The laws that governed their universe were finite. And while gods could rise, fall, be reborn and reign again, they could not shatter the boundaries written by chaos itself. They were trapped beneath the glass dome of structured divinity. Unless they returned to chaos. Nyx glanced downward, to the deep shadow spiraling in her palm, a tether she had forged to anchor herself during her last descent into the outer reaches of chaos. She hadn't used it in eons. It pulsed, beckoning her. But she was no fool. Even she feared the grotesque colossi of chaos, beings that laughed at the gods and that whispered in alien tongues, which rewrote physics. Creatures so vast, so old, so wrong, that they erased reason by proximity. She had seen one devour a multiverse in a blink. Another had stared at her once, and she felt time unravel. Would Hades survive a second descent into chaos? Would he even remain himself? Her expression softened, just briefly. She turned away from the dying star, drifting into the next realm. Perhaps she would return to her home. Perhaps she would wait for Hades to come again. Or perhaps she would descend herself once more, to search chaos directly. The forest was thick with shadows, shrouded in the mist of early dawn. Beneath the ancient oaks and twisted roots, smoke curled from campfires. Beneath the canopy, the last free human tribes had gathered in secret. Warriors, elders, seers, and chieftains of many bloodlines stood or sat in a rough circle, many of them eyeing one another with suspicion. Old enemies were now forced into a single alliance. But desperation was a powerful glue. At the center of the gathering sat a dark-skinned chieftain wrapped in lion pelts, his eyes bloodshot with fury. "That bastard, Helios," he spat, slamming his fist against a flat stone used as their makeshift table. "He claims unity, but all he's brought is tyranny. He forces any humans who dared not submit to him to their knees. He is blessed. Not even the sun burns without his word," growled another. "He controls the rivers, the crops, the winds. What kind of mun has that power?" "He's not a mun," someone shouted from the back. "He's an evil spirit clothed in mortal skin." An old seer with cracked fingernails and a voice like dry leaves raised her hand for silence. "We can call him all the names we like," she said grimly. "But words alone cannot stop him. Our weapons break like twigs against his warriors, and our shield shatters against his strength. He is a mun blessed by the gods." "Underworld gods," someone muttered bitterly. "Evil gods who bless the tyrant and want to rule the world." Silence fell. They despaired. Even their curses had lost force. They hated Helios, yet could not deny his power. His unity had brought peace, prosperity, and total domination. The cities under his banner flourished. His name was on every tongue. And above all, he was blessed. Deep within their hearts, they believed that if they also received a blessing of the gods, then surely they could do better. Legend speaks of how he brought down a giant, but they believed Helios couldn't do it without any help from gods. That's why, if they were to be blessed, they would surely build a kingdom greater than Herion. As they wallowed in frustration and envy, it came. A low rumble, not thunder, but something older, something that stirred the soul. The campfire sputtered and flickered. The wind changed. The air shivered with electricity. And then, a voice. It came from the skies, yet was not of the skies. It came from within their hearts, within the wind, within the world itself. "Children of Mun, I have heard your cries." The words were warm and majestic but powerful. An iron edge beneath honeyed tones. The tribes looked upward in awe. Even the animals fell silent. The wind stopped. The fires went still. And the stars themselves seemed to pause in their eternal journey. "I am Zeus, god of sky, king of the gods, father of storms, slayer of Cronus, lord of Olympus." The humans gasped. A few dropped to their knees immediately. Others hesitated, stunned. Even the proud chieftains found themselves trembling. A divine presence now filled the grove. "I see your bravery, your defiance, your hunger for freedom. And it reminds me of us." The voice swelled, but it no longer boomed, it whispered, like a god leaning close to share secrets. "Long ago, I too lived under the tyranny of a false king. My father, Cronus, devoured all he feared, just as Helios devours your nations. But I rose up. I rebelled. And I won." A ripple of wonder spread among the tribes. Could it be true? This being, Zeus, he had faced his own tyrant? The chieftain in lion pelts looked up with narrowed eyes. Then why speak to us now, god of Olympus? Why not strike Helios down yourself? There was a pause. Because man must shape his own destiny, Zeus replied. But I offer you the strength to do it. The winds picked up again, circling them. Leaves rose into the air, spinning like a vortex. Bow before me. Build temples in my name. Offer prayers and loyalty. And in return, I shall bless your blades, harden your shields, and set fire to your spirits. I shall make you a flame against the darkness that Helios has cast. Silence. The humans looked at one another. A few still hesitated. This could be a trick, an old chieftain muttered. No god speaks so freely. Despite this, the chieftain stood tall. He had lived through 6 wars. Buried 3 wives. He had no more patience for submission, not to Helios, and not to fear. He knelt. I accept your covenant, Lord of the Sky. One by one, others followed. Some knelt in hunger for power. Some knelt because they feared being left behind. Some knelt in silence, hearts heavy with doubt but minds eager for hope. And others knelt simply because they could not see another way. Zeus' voice softened but did not lose its power. You have made the right choice. And your enemies shall soon tremble. The sky cracked with white lightning. Thunder roared. And when the light faded, the wind returned. The fires sparked again. The birds resumed singing. But something was different now. Something had been bound. The tribes would no longer stand alone. They were now weapons in a far older game. And far above them, in the towering spires of Olympus, Zeus sat with a smirk curling on his lips, watching his pawns move into place. And, all over the world, the Olympians also began their move. Poseidon, the lord of the seas, was also trying to form his own kingdom of humans who would worship him. He did not show himself, for fear of being discovered by Hades, but his voice spread across the coastline. Dozens of coastal human tribes watched in awe and terror. Their villages clung to the sea like barnacles, their lives tied to the tides. You have fished my waters without thanks. You have built your huts upon my shores but never named a stone for me. No longer. From this day forth, you shall build temples to honor me. You shall pour wine and salt into the waves. You shall offer your greatest catch to my name. There was resistance at first. A few chieftains raised their spears, their faces painted with war symbols. But then the sea answered. A towering wave rose before the tribes, wide enough to drown 100 ships, silent and still in the sky. It hovered like the judgment of the heavens. The message was clear. And so they bowed. Thus, the sea tribes were claimed, not with charm, not with promises, but with the raw, unfathomable fear of drowning beneath a god's wrath. Elsewhere, Ares stood before the flammebony tribes of the jagged hills. He sealed his own divinity, donning the body of a mortal man. His arrival was no divine whisper, but a tempest of blood and chaos. The god of war came clad in bronze, his sword dripping with divine ichor, his eyes maddened with lust for battle. He gave no speeches. Instead, he challenged their strongest warrior to single combat. The duel lasted 7 seconds. Afterward, he walked into their camp and declared, "You fight well. Now fight for me. Raise my banners. Etch my name into your swords. And I shall give you endless war. Praise my name. I am Ares, god of war." The Flammebony cheered. They were born of violence. And now they had found their god. Far to the east, Apollo's mortal avatar descended upon the skyvine valleys, his beauty and radiance blinding the shepherds and singers that lived there. He brought them knowledge of poetry, medicine, archery, and light. The people gathered and listened for hours as he played his lyre, tears falling from their cheeks. He whispered of inspiration, of dreams, of beauty as a divine act. "Worship me," he said gently, "and your soul shall never know despair." They built a temple within 3 days. Dionysus, meanwhile, found the vine-blood tribes in the southern jungles. His approach was chaos incarnate, laughter, madness, music, and wild color. Wine flowed like rivers. The people danced, entranced by his presence. They worshipped him not through sermons, but through ecstasy. He never had to ask for loyalty. They gave it freely, deliriously. Hephaestus brought fire and forge to the mountain tribes. He taught them how to mine deeper, how to temper steel, and how to craft blades that would never break. In return, they built him a forged temple of molten gold and prayed to the god who made gods strong. Each Olympian claimed their own corner of the mortal world. One by one, the free tribes that had resisted Helios fell, not to him, but to the gods who abandoned humanity. A war of influence began. It was no longer about Helios. It was about divinity, about faith, about control. But not all the gods participated. High above, on a distant crag of Olympus where no throne sat, where no laws echoed, 3 goddesses stood in quiet observation. Athena, clad in silver armor with her helm resting at her side, stood with arms crossed, her violet eyes focused and serene. Artemis, the wild huntress, leaned against a stone pillar, polishing her silver bow, barely glancing at the chaos below. And beside them, Astrea, the silent judge of stars and cosmic balance, observed the earth with a motionless detachment, her eyes a mirror of the constellations. "They scramble like starving dogs," Artemis said, her voice laced with disdain. "Those humans are pathetic." "Indeed. I guess for them, kneeling before a divine was better than kneeling before a mortal," Athena replied calmly. Astrea did not speak. She was not interested in this charade. Artemis shrugged. "Let them have their little kingdoms. I'll stay with the forests. The moon does not beg for worship. People simply worship it." Athena turned her gaze to a distant city, the capital of Helios' kingdom. Its streets glowed with torchlight. Its temples rose with grandeur and grace. "They mock Helios," she said, "but none of them could have done what he has done." "No," Astrea finally said, her voice like the ringing of stars. "He was the one Lord Hades acknowledged, and no one in the past, present, and future can hope to be as great as him." Silence fell. Below, the world shifted. Kingdoms rose. Temples blazed. Gods sharpened their influence like blades. And above all, the human world began to split, not in war, but in something far worse. In ideology and faith. Deep beneath the hanging fortress of Hades, there exists a place where time bent and space frayed. It was not part of the underworld proper. It was beneath it, beside it, within it. A pocket dimension, woven and anchored by spells older than gods themselves, pulsed in utter silence. This was Hades' sanctum, created by the combined efforts of him and Hecate. It is not a throne room, nor a hall of judgment, but a laboratory of research and divinity, of desperate ambition and unbearable limits. The chamber stretched endlessly, its size warped by spatial compression. Along the walls, crystalline tubes floated midair, each one glowing with otherworldly hues, filled with the distilled essence from every corner of the cosmos. Golden ichor from slain gods, steaming blood of titans that sizzled upon contact with light, and writhing fluid collected from fallen monsters whose names had long been erased from creation. Fragmented scales of dragons, marrow of primal beasts, a sliver of Tartarus itself. Even droplets of power Hades had managed to condense from the lingering remains of primordial echoes. He moved among them like a shadow cloaked in authority, no longer wearing the black regalia of a king but a simpler form, a robe of woven abyss, sleeves rolled, hands stained with power. His eyes, which once held cold serenity, now gleamed with frustration. Training, meditation, rituals, they no longer work, he thought as he adjusted one of the many floating glyphs that maintained the arcane integrity of the tubes. My power is capped. I've reached the end of this reality structure. He had dissected his own soul, analyzed his domain from every angle, and even attempted to let it collapse to see how it would rebuild itself. Still, there was no growth. Not even in strength. Not even in authority. All he achieved was better control and refinement of his own power. So with that, he opted to stop training altogether and focus on finding other ways to break through the limits. Using powers and remnants of powerful beings, he hoped to find a clue for his ascendance. For years, he had holed up in this space. Hera ruled the underworld in his stead now. Despite her complaints of being overworked and understaffed, she accepted the job without question. With Hera ruling the underworld, it allowed Hades time to work uninterrupted. He had even considered Gaia's offer, hoping that they could have an offspring that could break the limits of this reality. Just then, he felt a presence. A shiver danced down the layered wards of his sanctum. Wards are so great, they separate this space from reality. The pocket dimension's folds trembled, momentarily exposing a crack in space before mending. Someone had passed through, but Hades felt that the intruder did not force their way in. It was authorized. Someone who bore keys to the dark. He turned, not surprised, only weary. "Hecate," he said, his voice echoing like a low drum through the pocket realm. As a co-creator of this realm, she naturally can enter and leave freely. She stood at the edge of the sanctum's central platform, wrapped in her dark celestial cloak that shimmered like starlit midnight. Torches lit themselves in her presence, though no flame touched wood or oil. Her eyes were cold and emotionless, but edged with a seriousness only gods understood. "You look like a corpse," she said, observing him up and down. "When did you last rest? Or eat? Or speak to someone who isn't made of essence and bone?" "I have no need for rest," Hades replied flatly, turning back to a pulsating tube filled with emerald sludge. "Nor for chatter." Hecate sighed. Hades at this moment reminds her of his past self, when he was but a young godling obsessed with power, completely disregarding anything that couldn't help him. Hecate stepped closer, glancing at the arcane constructs with mild interest, though she knew better than to touch anything. Even she might not survive it. "You've given Hera full authority over the underworld." "Some gods were unsatisfied," she said. "I trust her." "Trust doesn't mean you should vanish," she replied. "Your patrons have started to do their own thing without you keeping them in line." Hades didn't respond. He adjusted a sigil. A spike of divine energy shivered through the air. Silence stretched between them until Hecate finally spoke again, this time more seriously. "The Olympians have also begun moving. They've subjugated several of the free tribes. Poseidon took the sea tribes. Ares and Apollo claimed their own. Hermes has been whispering promises of freedom to rebels, so long as they pray to him. Temples are rising in their names." Hades paused. A long silence ensued. Then he continued adjusting another glyph, as if her words were rain on obsidian. "I see," he said. "Are you not going to do anything?" "No. You're really going to let them undo everything Helios built?" "Humanity have their own will, they can make their own choice," he said sharply, turning to her at last. His voice was calm, but beneath it was steel. "I gave them freedom. Not a leash. If I interfere, if I force them to kneel to Helios, then what makes me different from the gods who tried to destroy them and force them to bow before them?" Hecate's gaze softened. "But you know what they're doing. The Olympians don't care about the humans. They care about influence. They fear Helios because he can disrupt their order." With nymphs and other mortal races declining their faith in gods, the Olympians hope to use humans as a replacement. But Helios has been conquering humans under his banner. It would be fine if it was just that, but Helios himself is a believer of Hades, and the Heraean kingdom worships the underworld gods. If all humans were to worship the underworld, then what would be left of the Olympians? If it wasn't for Hades, Zeus would have already smitten Helios and his kingdom into ashes. "I can't do anything about that," Hades said, turning back to his experiments. "Those humans chose to worship the Olympians. I respect their choice." Hecate was quiet for a moment, then stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You're too noble for your own good sometimes." "I'm not noble," he replied. "I'm frustrated. I want to transcend this reality. If I can break the framework that binds gods, maybe I can find a new order for existence. One that isn't chained to worship." "And if you fail?" "Then I vanish. A failed shadow in a sea of light." Hecate nodded. "Then I hope you don't fail. For our sake, and for theirs." She turned and began to walk away, her presence fading with each step into the folds of reality. Before she left completely, she looked over her shoulder. "Don't forget, Hades. The humans may have free will, but sometimes, even free men cry for a leader." Then she was gone. Hades stood alone in the pulsing dark of his sanctum, surrounded by tubes and souls and impossible essence. The glyphs buzzed softly as he turned back to his work, back to his desperate, maddening search for transcendence. Somewhere above, the world moved slowly. And deep below, a god reached for infinity. In the heart of the Heraean kingdom stood the grand palace of Solara, its golden spires piercing the sky like the fingers of men reaching toward the gods they once feared. It was a marvel of early human civilization, a city not born from divine decree but from mortal will. Its people, once scattered tribes surviving in caves and thatched huts, now walked paved streets with pride in their hearts and steel in their hands. At the center of the palace, within a marble hall illuminated by stained glass depicting humanity's rise, Helios sat upon his throne. Draped in a crimson mantle trimmed with lion fur, his bronze armor gleamed with a subtle warmth that came not from polish but from the sacred fire Prometheus had gifted him. His crown, forged by the finest smiths of the realm, bore no jewels, only a band of black iron taken from the ruins of the first monster nest they had ever destroyed. Before him, in the high-vaulted chamber, a scout knelt. "Your Majesty," the young scout said, bowing low with sweat on his brow, "we bring grave news from the northern watchtowers." Helios leaned forward slightly. "Speak." The scout swallowed. "Several tribes who had refused your offer for unity have formed a coalition. They refused your offer and turned towards the Olympians, bowing before the gods." The word hit the room like a thunderclap. A ripple of tension moved through the Council of the Flame, Helios' inner circle of generals, ministers, and high sages. Several stood, voices rising with fury. "Bow before the Olympian gods, you say?" snarled General Ammonius, the burly commander of the Iron Legion. "The gods who watched us suffer, who sent monsters to feast on our children, those gods who punished Lord Prometheus for giving us hope." "They are opportunists," spat Councilman Caldus, his wrinkled hands clenched behind his back. "Lady Hecate has sent an oracle of how gods needed the faith of mortals. Now that we dominated the land, they wanted our faith, for sure. Damn bastards, where were they when we were suffering?" "They seduced the weak with promises," another noble hissed. "Cowards who chose to kneel before those who would leash us once more." "Traitors," a councilwoman declared. "Every last one who raised their hands against us should be buried beneath the ashes of their false temples." The room erupted into shouts of anger, calls for vengeance, and cries to the gods themselves to witness humanity's fury. But Helios said nothing. He sat still on the throne, his eyes unmoving, his face cast in the colored light of a window depicting the moment he lit the first fire in mankind's name. The chamber fell quiet only when a massive figure stepped forward and knelt. It was General Cheiron, Helios' most trusted warrior and the commander of the royal host. His breastplate bore a fresh gouge from the last border skirmish, and his braided hair was streaked with blood and ash. "Your Majesty," Cheiron said, his voice deep and solemn, "give the order, and I will ride. I will burn their banners, raise their altars, and drag the bones of false prophets through the streets." The council watched in hushed anticipation. Helios still did not answer. He closed his eyes. He saw flames. Not the flames of war, but the sacred one, Prometheus' fire. The fire that had given humanity its future. That flame, flickering within every heart, was now being pulled in opposite directions. Choice, he thought. This is the cost of free will. He had known this day would come. The day when mankind, once unified by desperation, would be divided by faith. It wasn't just a rebellion. It was an existential question. To whom do humans owe their allegiance? Himself? Or the gods? Finally, Helios opened his eyes and stood. The room held its breath. He descended the stairs from the throne, standing face to face with Cheiron. His voice, when it came, was calm and clear, but it carried the weight of a nation. "No." Cheiron looked up, stunned. "Your Majesty?" "We will not go to war with our brothers," Helios said. "Not yet. But they raise arms against us. They slaughter our border guards. They build temples to Zeus and Poseidon and Ares, gods who abandoned us when we were hunted like beasts." Helios turned to the council. "And you think more blood will bring peace?" A murmur swept the hall. "They were weak," Helios said. "They doubted the path we walk. So they looked skyward instead of forward. They saw gods offering salvation and chose chains over hardship. That was their choice." He turned back to Cheiron. "Prepare the armies. Reinforce the borders. But we will not strike unless they enter our lands. If they bring war to us, then we will answer in kind." "But, sire," said one of the sages, "if we don't act first, they may gain ground. They build temples to the gods. Their prayers may give them real power." "I am not afraid of the gods. We have the blessings and protection of Lord Hades." Helios said coldly. If those gods dared to interfere with immortal affairs more than they should, then they will suffer the wrath of the underworld. The chamber fell silent once more. Helios raised his hand, and the flames within the sconces of the chamber grew taller and brighter, as though they echoed his will. We are not tyrants. We are not crusaders. We are builders. Let them make their choices. But if they bring death to our doors, then we will become fire and burn everything that they have. Kyrian lowered his head. As you command, my king. Helios returned to his throne, his mind already turning. If the gods want to make this a game of faith, he thought, then let them see what mankind's faith in itself can become. Above him, the stained glass caught the dying sunlight. And across the land, battle drums began to sound. Far above the clouds, where even the wind feared to tread, rose the sacred peak of a primordial mountain. It was a mountain so ancient that not even the gods remembered its birth. Here, where the sky kissed stone and the earth whispered in tongues older than time, Gaia, the primordial mother, sat alone. She was the earth itself, not merely of it, but it. Her form shimmered with wild majesty, neither flesh nor stone, but something in between. Her skin bore the hue of fertile loam and ancient roots, her hair was woven with vines and petals from flowers long extinct, and her eyes, deep and vast as mountain lakes, shone with sorrowed fury. She sat upon a natural throne, carved not by hand but by eons of pressure and tectonic size. Around her bloomed gardens untouched by the hand of Mun or God, an Eden that lived on only here, where time hesitated and memory slept. Below her, the world groaned. Gaia's senses spanned the vastness of the earth like nerves extending into every crack, forest, and river. She felt the ache of dying woods, the once lush canopies now stripped by axes bearing divine sigils. She heard the cries of animals hunted not for survival, but for sport and trophies. And she felt the filth of human waste leaking into pure mountain streams, rivers she had nurtured like her own children now gagging on bile and blood. And the gods rejoiced. She watched as Poseidon blessed ships that tore coral reefs apart in search of pearls and plunder. As Ares armed human tribes, urging them into brutal conflicts that trampled fertile plains into scarred battlegrounds. As Dionysus led humans into gluttonous revelries, draining the life from forests to fuel their excesses. Even Hephaestus, once noble in his labor, now taught them to forge tools that raised the wilds instead of honoring them. And worst of all, Zeus, her own descendant, her blood diluted through countless divine generations, rewarded this ruin. He promised mortals dominion over the world so long as they built his temples and fed his vanity with prayer and sacrifice. Gaia clenched the arms of her throne, and the mountain beneath her shuddered. Fools. She whispered, her voice echoing like thunder inside the earth itself. The same rage that once swelled when Uranus, her first consort, imprisoned their children now burned anew. But this time, it was deeper, more visceral. This destruction did not come from Titans, who at least revered her soil, nor from the primordials, who do not interfere with others' domain. No, this came from her grandchildren, the Olympians, drunk on power and heedless of consequence. Worse still, the humans had followed them. Prometheus made them to be stewards, Gaia said softly, pain etched into every syllable. Not parasites. It was then her thoughts turned again to the underworld, to the one being she had not yet abandoned hope for. Hades. Of all the gods, he alone had not marred her surface. He ruled the realm beneath, where roots twisted into silence and souls slumbered in endless procession. He took no forests. He raised no plains. He asked for no temples and demanded no blood from her beasts. Even in his brooding silence, he had respected the sanctity of life and death. It was why she had descended to him. Once, not long ago, she appeared before him in a grove that lay between the realm of the dead and the soil of the living, a place only primordials could reach. She had made him an offer few would dare dream, to sire a race with her, children not of heaven nor hell, but of the earth itself. Beings who would rise not as gods, but as judges and punishers, harbingers of balance and wrath. Beings born not to rule, but to cleanse. She remembered his gaze, heavy with caution, clouded with conflict. He had said nothing, only listened, then returned to his fortress to meditate, to hide. But Gaia knew. He was tempted. But he feared the cost. Something was holding him back. Gaia sat upon her throne, staring into the horizon. Far below, she saw the flames of industry, the smoke of war, and the spreading desecration of Mun emboldened by God. Cities rose like tumors across the fertile plains. Forests fell like dominoes. Sacred groves bled sap like open wounds. She dug her fingers into the stone of the mountain, and flowers around her wilted under the sheer pressure of her frustration. I have waited long enough. She rose from her throne, her form towering and terrible, the sky dimming as if the very heavens feared her ascent. Her voice echoed into the infinite winds. Hades. The time to hesitate is over. She sent her will through the soil and stone, across the fault lines and rivers, down into the black veins of the underworld, where it would whisper into the pocket dimension where Hades hid. She did not compel him, but she made herself known. Let him feel her fury. Let him know her patience had reached its limits. And then she waited again, her silhouette framed by twilight, as storm clouds churned around her like morning shrouds. If Hades would not stand beside her, she would act alone. And the Olympians would remember what it meant to awaken a sleeping world. Underworld. Inside Hades' secret realm. Hades can be seen tinkering with various mythical glyphs and bloods of primordials. He had long since forgotten how long he had stayed here. However, at this moment, Hades felt something. The room stilled. The swirling energies around the realm dimmed. The air tensed, as if frightened. Something ancient moved through the layers of reality like a root-breaking stone, and a whisper, deep, feminine, unfathomable, brushed against his mind. Hades. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense. It was a presence, like the press of mountains on one's chest, like the breath of soil around a buried corpse. He knew it immediately. Gaia. He froze. The sigils halted midair. Even the glowing blood in the tubes stopped bubbling. For a moment, he did nothing. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the stone altar at the center of the room. He stared at it, silent. The primordial mother had reached out again. He heard no request, no threat, only that overwhelming summons, that expectation. He knew why she called. Her anger was growing. The Olympians were destroying her body, inciting humans to spread like fire. The forests were falling, the rivers choking. She had warned him, pleaded with him, invited him to rise higher, to sire a new race, to change everything. And still, he hesitated. He clenched his hand. The bones beneath his skin groaned. He had dedicated himself to seeking strength, and yet, when offered a path, he had recoiled. Was it fear? Was it morality? Or simply, weariness? At last, he whispered, not aloud, but through the currents of divine thought, a quiet, almost reluctant response that reached Gaia across the realms. Wait. That was all he said. Then he turned back to his work. But he could not focus. The orbs of chaotic light no longer danced with the same rhythm. The blood samples felt heavy in the air. The theories he had mapped now felt hollow. His thoughts were clouded with what Gaia represented. Outside his chamber, reality shifted. Far above, in the overworld, atop the primordial, Gaia narrowed her eyes. She stood, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. The wind swirled around her. The trees nearby bent under invisible pressure. Birds and beasts had long since fled her presence. The very mountain seemed to breathe with her heartbeat. Wait, she muttered, tasting his word with disdain. The wind howled in response. She could crush mountains with a sigh. She could awaken creatures buried beneath the crust since before Olympus was born. And now, she was being asked to wait. She should have already struck down whoever dared to make her wait. But she did not strike the earth. Not yet. Instead, Gaia drew in a long breath and slowly sat back on her throne of roots and stone. Her nails dug into the rock, and with patience fraying, she whispered to herself, "Then you must choose soon, Hades. For the world will not wait much longer." Clouds blackened overhead. The skies trembled. Somewhere far away, the land cracked as a forest fell under the weight of mortal greed. And Gaia listened, waiting for the god who had not yet said yes. The night sky stretched above like a dark canvas, flickering with distant stars that seemed indifferent to the squabbles of men below. Beneath the cold light of the moon, in the heart of a windswept plateau ringed by mountains and wild forests, a great tent of war stood. It was stitched together from beast hides, reinforced with spears, and lit within by a roaring fire that cast jagged shadows across the weathered faces of its occupants. Inside, dozens of tribal leaders sat in a broken circle. Their clothes were dyed in the hues of their clans, crimson from the blood fangs of the western savannas, pale azure from the lakewalkers of the salt shores, earthy green from the rootborn, and many others from the steppes, the cold marshes, and the blazing deserts. Each one of them had once been a sovereign in their own right. Now, they were united by a common enemy, Helios, the tyrant king who claimed divine mandate from the underworld. They are free tribes who refused to surrender to tyranny, yet each one of them had bent the knee to a different god of Olympus. Of course, those cannot be said, and they have long since been blinded by their faith to see it. The air inside the tent was thick with tension, sweat, and pride. Helios' kingdom grows fat on stolen grain, snarled Varkas of the red ash, his teeth filed to points, his hands stained with blood from a recent skirmish. He marches across the land with those cursed city builders, calling themselves civilized while burning forests and enslaving the free. The fact that they were doing the same thing, but much worse, obviously didn't cross their mind. After all, they believe they are right. I, grunted Mirka of the drowned stones, one eye milky with blindness, a trident-shaped pendant hanging from her neck. And Lord Poseidon told me the same. Helios must be crushed. My sea warriors have already begun raiding his ports. Soon, they'll starve. That will probably anger his god, spat Thalos the tusk-bearer, draped in the fur of a boar, his chest painted with the red mark of Ares. And I say let it. War is the path of men. Lord Ares shall bless the strongest. That will be me. Several leaders grunted and barked in approval, while others jeered. You brute, hissed Delmenas the flame-eyed, a pale-skinned chieftain from the desert, his body adorned with golden chains blessed by Apollo. Strength alone does not win wars. Lord Apollo gave me a vision. Helios' wall shall fall not by force, but by light. We must burn their gods from their hearts. Light and vision? TCH. My people follow Lord Dionysus, sneered Gorum of the wild wastes, swaying slightly from the fermented wine in his flask. We spread chaos, not order. Let Helios' men drown in madness and rot. Madness is not strategy, shouted Elysia of the ice bent, rising from her seat. The symbol of Hephaestus was seared into her vambrace. My forge masters craft weapons from divine blueprints. With them, we will pierce their armor and their pride. They glared at each other, their faith in their god blinding them from cooperating, and the room soon broke into open shouting. Words twisted into insults. Spittle flew. Hands hovered near hilts. Unity frayed at the seams. But then came the voice of Varan the Silent, chief of no tribe but the chosen mouthpiece of Zeus himself. Varan is a beautiful man, with rumors claiming his beauty fascinated Zeus, who took him in as a lover, giving him many blessings. He stood quietly at the edge of the tent, his robes the deepest black, his eyes glowing faintly with divine influence. When he raised his hand, all fell silent. You forget why you were chosen, Varan said calmly. Each of you was blessed not just for strength or loyalty, but for potential. Zeus himself sees your pain, your pride, and your hatred for the one who defies Olympus. The leaders simmered, the fire reflecting in their eyes. Varan walked into the circle, slowly. But you argue like dogs, each one barking for their master's bone. Do you truly wish to defeat Helios? Then stop boasting about which god's gifts are superior. They have all shared one cause, his destruction. A long silence. Finally, Delmenas nodded. Very well. What do you propose, mouth of Zeus? Varan smiled slightly. Each of you shall do what you do best. You, flame-eyed, shall spread your solar doctrine. You, tusk-bearer, break their ranks at the border. You, ice-bent, unleash your forges. And the rest of you, build temples, spread worship, and convert his people from within. And if they resist? Varkas growled. Then remind them what happens to those who worship a god who does not protect them. The tent fell into grim agreement. Outside, the wind howled over the plateau. Inside, the Alliance of Broken Nations had become a coalition of vengeance, forged not in loyalty, but in rage, and guided by the hands of gods who saw mortals as pawns. None of them noticed the shadow that lingered far beyond the tents, watching from the cliff above. A lone wanderer in a dark cloak stood there, his face obscured, his aura strange, neither god nor mortal. He watched the gathering with a narrowed gaze, then slowly turned and descended into the night. The war was about to begin. And fate was moving again. The sky was a tapestry of fading twilight, where the final hues of sun sank beneath the horizon, casting long shadows upon the forest that remained untouched by human hands. Deep within its heart, nestled between silver-leaved trees and mist-covered moss, was a primordial lake. Its surface was as smooth as polished jade, a perfect mirror of the heavens above. A lone figure stepped from the underbrush, hooded, draped in dark robes stitched with the runes of forgotten tongues. His presence stirred neither birds nor beasts, for he walked with the silence of twilight itself. He stood at the water's edge, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, and gazed down into the still lake. The wind held its breath as he spoke. "Lady Hecate," he whispered. Ripples did not come. No wave distorted the lake. Instead, a face slowly appeared upon the surface, a vision not of water, but of soul and starlight. Possessing a beauty that can captivate any mun, Hecate, the keeper of crossroads, the guardian of mysteries. Her gaze met his, calm and ancient. "Leoras," she said softly. "You've called. Do you have any news?" The hooded wanderer bowed his head. "Yes, my lady. I bring news from the coalition of the rebel tribes. They have begun preparations. Armed by Hephaestus, guided by Apollo, drunk on Dionysus' madness and driven by Ares' wrath, they will march against Helios." Hecate nodded slightly. "And the Olympians?" "They watch from their thrones," Leora said. "Some whisper. Some rejoice. But none thought of stopping it. They believe this war will break Helios, and if the humans worship them in return, it will be their gain." A long pause. The lake shimmered with reflected stars. "They play games again," Hecate murmured. "As they did in the Titanomachy. Always others' blood spilled for their gain." Leoras hesitated. "Shall I intervene?" "No." Her voice was firm but tired. "You have done well. Return to the underworld. I will summon you again if needed." Leoras bowed once more. "As you command." The image faded from the lake, leaving behind only his reflection. Leoras turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing into the growing night. Back in the depths of the underworld, far beyond the reach of mortal eyes, within a chamber of silver stone and flowing dark water, Hecate leaned against her throne, massaging her temple with slender fingers. Candles of blue fire floated in the air, casting her shadow into three directions: past, present, and future, the very symbol of her dominion. Scrolls and maps lay scattered on the floor, glowing softly with prophetic symbols and divine equations. But all pointed to the same eventuality: conflict, death, and collapse. "They will fall," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "Helios, the boy who seeks to unite mortals, will fall. Not because of his faults, but because he was left alone." She rose from her throne and walked toward a giant window of crystal that looked out upon the ghostly city of Nox, the center of the underworld. Lanterns floated like stars between its spires, divine spirits walked the streets below, and the river Lethe glowed faintly as it wound its way around the city walls. It was peaceful, structured, and firm. All that Hades had built. And now, all that he was ignoring. Her thoughts drifted to him, the Lord of the Dead, the quiet brother, the king of the underworld. Once, he had stood tall and proud, delivering judgment and protecting the realm of souls. Now, he buried himself in a private dimension, seeking to ascend, to force strength through experimentation and obsession. Hecate had visited him many times. Each time, he said little. His eyes were no longer filled with wisdom but with fire and frustration, a hunger to overcome the boundaries of godhood. And now, the world above burned while he chased shadows. Her hands clenched. "Hades, are you really not going to protect your believers?" She whispered in confusion. "The faith of humanity is of no use to them. The spirit energy from souls is more than enough to sustain their needs. But still, as the first human to worship underworld gods, it would be a lie to say that Hecate doesn't care about them." She turned back toward her desk and summoned a parchment. Upon it, she began to write a report, a request, and a warning. Something that would eventually find its way to Hera, or perhaps to Minth or Aphrodite, anyone who might shake Hades from his isolation. Because if he would not rise soon, then everything he left behind would fall apart. Deep within the heart of the underworld, in a realm no soul could wander and no god dared tread, Hades labored. A black void surrounded him, punctuated only by the soft glow of hundreds of floating tubes and artifacts. Each contained a different energy source: the blood of titans, the marrow of long-dead primordials, cursed fragments of chaos-born beasts, and radiant essence extracted from lesser deities. He worked tirelessly for what felt like centuries, breaking down the energy signatures of godhood, stripping the divine spark apart, and studying how it clung to the soul and how it intertwined with one's domain and identity. His eyes, once cold and detached, now burned with grim determination. And finally, the pieces began to click. With trembling hands, Hades activated the obsidian mechanism floating at the center of the room, a divine lattice woven from threads of metaphysical logic. Symbols of all languages shimmered in the air as he inserted the final variables. Runes written in primordial script whirled through the machine like a living mind. Then, at last, a singular conclusion presented itself, simple, elegant, and terrible. A path to transcendence. However, it is something that he himself cannot use unless he kills himself and reincarnates once again. A method to completely transcend the limitations set on this universe by altering a being's spiritual and physical blueprint. For Hades, using this method would be like destroying a skyscraper and rebuilding a new one. Basically, kill himself, get reborn, and alter his own spiritual and physical blueprint. Although gods can revive, it can take centuries, and most of the time, they would lose their domains and have a new one. So Hades completely refused to do this. So he stood silently, staring at the final projection displayed before him, a metaphysical chart of unbound evolution. He can't use it. But his child can. While still in their mother's womb, Hades can alter their blueprint using this method. A divine child, whose soul could be altered before birth. A vessel, cleansed of the laws of this universe, immune to its limitations, unbound by the cosmic threads that bound even the gods. Such a child would be capable of breaking through dimensions, perceiving truths even chaos might obscure. Not merely powerful, but transcendent. A bridge between divinity and that which lies beyond. But there was a price. The ritual required a spark of chaos. Not the diluted fragments gathered from primordial gods, but the living essence of chaos itself, something Hades had once touched when he accidentally traveled beyond the firmament, and something he feared ever since. More importantly, the child must not be ordinary. It could not be born of casual passion or divine whim. No, the child's soul must be forged with deliberate intention, shaped by parents whose divine cores could endure the ritual strain. It had to be born of balance between two entities whose domains were ancient and foundational. Hades immediately thought of Gaia. Sighing, he closed his eyes. Gaia, the primordial earth, mother of life. She had approached him once, expressing her desire. She offered herself not for union, but for revolution, to birth a being that could correct the world. To punish the Olympians. He had refused her then. Not because he feared her, but because he feared what such a child would mean. He had already grown tired of gods playing with the lives of mortals and monsters alike. He had hoped to transcend on his own. But now, his hands curled into fists. He knew that the world was spiraling toward conflict. The Olympians had begun to grasp for worshippers like starving dogs. They offered blessings not out of love, but out of greed. Hyrio's vision, a unified humanity, was breaking under divine interference. Hades knew it all. He wasn't ignorant of the affairs of the mortal world. But he chose to turn a blind eye. He had given humanity free will, and whoever they worship, whoever they go to war against, he has no reason to interfere. Unless the gods themselves decided to descend and personally interfere, then Hades would act like nothing happened. Of course, he will definitely bring judgment to the Olympians. But he won't be the one doing it. He opened his eyes. A thought echoed through the chamber, his voice thunderous yet laced with unease. Gaia. Far above the underworld, in the overworld's deepest mountains, Gaia stirred. She had felt the call that is not a voice but a vibration through the core of existence itself. She opened her ancient eyes, and the river stilled, the trees bowed, and the earth listened. Her lips curled to a smile. He was ready. The sun had just begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone walls of the grand city of Harion, capital of the unified human kingdom. From the high windows of the magnificent palace, golden light filtered in, bathing the throne room in a somber glow. Helios sat atop his throne of black stone and silver, one leg crossed over the other, chin resting on a closed fist. His eyes were distant, almost troubled. Around him, his advisors and generals whispered to one another in tight circles, wary of breaking the heavy silence. The door to the chamber burst open with a loud clang. A young soldier, barely a mun, stumbled in, armor scratched, dust clinging to his boots and cloak. He fell to one knee and bowed his head deeply. "Your Majesty," he shouted, his voice hoarse from the long ride. "A dire report. The coalition of the free tribes has begun their assault." The room erupted with voices. "What? They dare. Those traitorous snakes." Kirio's eyes narrowed as he slowly rose from his throne, his long dark cloak unfurling like a shadow. The room fell silent once more. "Continue," he commanded, his voice cold yet calm. The soldier gulped and continued, trembling. "They struck under the cover of night. 6 of our outer villages are gone. Razed. Survivors report warriors bearing the symbols of the sea god, the warbringer, the sun, and others. They are being guided by divine blessings. The resistance is stronger than we anticipated." Murmurs filled the hall again. Faces turned pale. Some looked to Helios in fear. Others, in doubt. General Kirion, Kirio's most trusted general, quickly kneeled down in front of him. "My king, allow me to lead our legions. Give me 10,000, and I will burn their rebellion to the ground. Let them see what fate awaits those who betray the vision of unity." Helios walked down the steps of his throne platform slowly, boots clicking against polished obsidian. "Resistance," he murmured. "Even though those gods have abandoned us, even though they sent monsters as punishments for having hope, they still worshipped them." He stopped before the general, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You shall have your 10,000, General Kirion. No, take 15. I want this fire stamped out before it spreads. Leave no stone unturned. But spare those who surrender. We are not beasts. We are builders of a new world." Kirion nodded fiercely. "By your will, my king." Helios turned his gaze to the rest of the court. "Let this be known, Harion will not fall. These lands were raised by the hands of men, not gods. The resistance seeks to drag us back into servitude, to kneel before those who have already forsaken us once. But we will not kneel. We will stand. And we will remind the world that the age of men will never end." A thunderous cheer erupted throughout the throne room. Helios' eyes, however, remained cold as stone. Far above the veil of clouds, beyond the reach of mortal birds and Olympian eyes, rose a colossal mountain untouched by time or weather. Its peak shimmered with threads of stardust and the echo of ages. This mountain was one of the few remnants of the world before form, before gods, titans, or men. A primordial mountain where existence first condensed into stone. Atop its windless summit, Gaia stood. The mother of earth, eternal and vast, took the form of a beautiful woman crowned in wild vines and dressed in a white robe. Her feet were bare against the stone, but grass grew beneath her toes as though the mountain itself bloomed in her presence. Her expression was hard, an ancient anger stirring in her chest as she watched the world below. The forests were burning again. The rivers ran black where humans dumped their refuse. And the Olympians, those arrogant children, once again toyed with mortal destiny, raising armies of worshippers like pieces on a divine game board. "Soon, you will all pay for your sins." At that moment, the air suddenly shifted. A soft tremble across the threads of reality. From a shimmer in the fabric of the world, a tall figure stepped forth, cloaked in black and crowned with quiet authority. Hades had arrived. His presence was weightless yet undeniable. His eyes, deep and cold like the river Lethe, met Gaia's without a word. Gaia's grimace softened slightly. "You came," she said, her voice carrying the tone of rocks grinding beneath the sea. "I was beginning to think you would not accept my offer and remain down there entirely." "I was thinking, researching." Hades replied simply. "You should know that." Gaia gestured beside her, and a stone grew upward from the mountain, forming a seat. Hades stepped forward, his black robes whispering across the stone, and sat beside her in the silence that only gods and ancients could endure without discomfort. For a long moment, neither spoke. Below them, the world continued its dance of ambition and destruction. Villages were razed and razed. Prayers soared into the sky like smoke. War drums echoed through valleys like thunder. Finally, Gaia asked, her tone quiet but piercing, "Is it enough to simply watch, Hades?" The king of the underworld did not answer immediately. She turned her gaze upon him, those ancient eyes of hers gleaming with something deeper than accusation, sorrow, perhaps, or hope long denied. You favored him, she continued. That boy, Helios. You believed in his fire. Yet now he stands alone, surrounded by enemies, betrayed by his kind, and devoured by war. Is it truly enough to remain still? Hades closed his eyes, drawing in the silence like breath. Then he opened them, gazing at the endless sky. He is my believer, Hades said at last, his voice low. If he had asked for help, I would immediately hear and answer his prayers. Gaia remained silent, waiting for Hades to finish his words. Soon, he continued. But did you know? He prays to me not for victory, not for miracles, not even for protection. He only prays for one thing. Gaia arched a brow. And that is to be witnessed. Hades' gaze sharpened. Not to be saved. Not to be led. Merely watched. For me to watch him walk his path, make his choices, win or lose, on his own strength. Helios does not pray for blessings, nor for strength or victory. He simply wanted the God he believed in to watch him. Watch his choices, watch his valor, and respect his will. Gaia was silent. That is what he asked of me, Hades continued. And that I will honor. The Earth Mother leaned back slightly, wind threading through her moss-colored hair. You gods of this world, she muttered, always so bound by will, by laws, by contracts. Yet you, Hades, you are always different. You respect mortals more than any of the others. Perhaps, maybe because I can relate to them. Or maybe because I have a special relationship with their race, Hades said. Whatever the case, it will not change the fact that I love humanity. A breeze drifted across the summit, carrying with it the cries of battle from far away. Gaia clenched her fists. Still, she said. How long can you stay your hand? If Helios dies, if his kingdom crumbles, what then? The Olympians will grow stronger. Humanity will break. And the earth itself, my body, will suffer. I know, Hades said softly. He turned toward her now, facing the great Earth Mother with calm resolution. That is why I came. Gaia's expression flickered. So, have you made your decision? I have, Hades said. A pause. Then, quietly, he whispered. I will accept your offer. The mountain shivered. Gaia's eyes widened, not in surprise, but in solemn understanding. You will father a new race, she said, her voice trembling with layered emotion. With me. Not of mortals, not of gods, but something beyond. I know, Hades confirmed. Besides, I also have my selfish reasons why I wanted to do this. He paused, his eyes staring straight at her. I have found a way to ascend further. But I cannot use it on myself for now. I hope to use this method on our child. With them, I may be able to find out more about ascension, and maybe I can transcend these limitations without having to start over. Do you honestly believe that our offspring could be suitable for that method? Gaia asked. I do, Hades said. You are the foundation. I am the gate. The earth trembled again, subtly, not in violence, but in anticipation. Roots shifted far beneath the soil. Mountains tilted toward the stars. Gaia stepped toward him, her eyes glowing with green-gold fire. Then let it be so, she said. For the sake of this world. And the next. The two stood atop the primordial peak, no longer as gods or forces, but as the architects of a new possibility, a child born of death and life, of domain and origin. A being who might one day walk into chaos itself and not be devoured. Below, Helios marched to war. And far above, two ancient powers made a pact that would change the fate of all creation.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.